All right, does it sound good again? I think I might have fixed it. All right, looks like the sound is good again. I apologize for that. I think I clicked on something I shouldn't have. So I'll just go ahead and start the first 3 minutes over. We'll pretend that did not happen since you guys, I believe, can all hear me now. If someone could do me a quick favor, just type in if they can hear me so I know we're good. All right, so we're all good on sound again. All right, so I'll just repeat that little first part there. Like I mentioned, this is the very first inaugural webinar we've had geared towards service technicians. We've been doing webinars for the past 4 years, mainly for engineering, sales, application, that type of thing. This one is geared towards service. If you're doing this in regards to FAD credit hours for Bryant and Carrier dealers, you do need to follow some specific rules that you would have read when you registered. The first of which is each person that needs hours has to log in individually. You cannot do it as a group. If you're just doing it for the knowledge, that's totally fine. Sit together at the conference table, it's all good. But if you need the credit hours, you have to log in individually. With that being said, you also have to pay attention. GoToMeeting has a tool where it uses to track your attentiveness, if you will. And if you have other web browsers open or email programs or things like that, it will ding your score, and you might not be able to get credit hours if you have a low score. And obviously, you have to answer any pop-up questions that come up during that time. Additionally, because this is a 2-hour webinar, which is a little bit long for a webinar, but we want to get all the service stuff covered, we will be taking a 5-minute intermission at the 1-hour mark, primarily so my voice doesn't go hoarse and I don't turn into Peter Brady on you. You are seeing up on the screen, it says Evolution Connex Control. That is our topic for today. This also applies to Carrier Infinity Touch. I just had a look at the audience who registered, and there was more Bryant guys than Carrier guys, so I went ahead and used the red slides. But basically, it's the same information, so it applies to both groups equally. All right, let's get into the exciting parts. All right, so the first thing to know about this control is it is, in fact, backwards compatible. If you have one of the older style ones, like the vertical one that's shown there in the picture, or even the one that's older than that, that thing can come off the wall, and the Infinity Touch or Bryant Evolution Connex can go on the wall in its place. Anything that the old stat could have talked to, the new stat can talk to. When I say new, this is a 3-year-old touchscreen stat, but it's newer than all those old ones you've had on the wall. Those old ones came out in 2005, so anything you put it on in 2005 and later can come off the wall, and the new guy can go on. The wiring is exactly the same. It's ABCD wiring. All these stats use 4 wires, which is obviously ideal because in many cases you only have 4 wires in the wall. We don't want to pull no wires if we can avoid it. So you have 4 wires that go from the stat to the furnace or the fan coil. A, B, C, D. A and B are communication wires. C and D are 24-volt power wires. Additionally, from the furnace to the outdoor unit, assuming you have a communicating outdoor unit, you have an additional 2 or 4 wires depending on the version of outdoor unit you have. Historically, you needed to run 4 wires out there, but some of the newer 2-stage condensing units, Bryant and Carrier, have been putting transformers in them, so you do not need to run 4 wires outside. You only need to use 2. So any current 2-stage or more stages of unit would be able to do that. Single-stage units or older existing units would still require the 4 wires. When I say 2 stages or more, we do, if you don't already know, we do have a 5-stage AC unit, and we also have a 5-stage heat pump, and we have a 61-stage heat pump. So all of those 2, 5, or 61 stages only require 2 wires from the furnace to the outdoor unit. The indoor unit, the furnace or the fan coil, must be able to speak Evolution or Infinity controls. That's an absolute requirement. If it does not, you cannot use the stat whatsoever. The outdoor unit does not necessarily have to be communicating. Obviously, that's ideal. The reason someone's buying a communicating stat is so they can get all the functionality of that and the automatic airflow setup and have the alarm codes from the condensing unit come report back to it and all that great stuff. But if you don't want to use a communicating outdoor unit, you do not have to. The furnace itself has a spare relay on it, and the thermostat can tell the furnace to use that spare relay to engage the Y1 signal to turn on a single-stage outdoor unit. Now, if you have a 2-stage outdoor unit that doesn't have communication ability, then we got to do some other tricks, which we'll talk about in a little while. There are some cases that you have to use this touchscreen control. There are other cases where it's optional. So anything that speaks Evolution or Infinity, which would be furnace, fan coil, or in some cases small package residential rooftops, you can use it. but there's some pieces of equipment that you absolutely have to use it. On the Bryant side, there's the extreme heat pump, the 61-stage heat pump I mentioned, and on the Carrier side, the equivalent would be the Carrier green speed unit. Those two pieces of equipment, and the Carrier one is 25 VNA is the model number, the Bryant one's 280 A and B. Those ones have to use this control. They cannot function without it. It's the only way that they will operate. So no choice on that whatsoever. Additionally, there's modulating gas furnaces, which is the 987M on the Bryant side and the 59MN7 on the Carrier side. Those units could be bastardized, if you will, to run off of a regular thermostat if you needed to do that in a pinch, but you wouldn't want to sell it that way. You don't want to put a 1 or 2 stage stat on a modulating gas furnace as a permanent install for the customer, because you're basically disabling the features of the furnace that they bought. So that wouldn't make any sense. But you could do it in a pinch if you had to. But normally we would say you have to use that stat with that furnace. So basically, if I got modulating compressors or I got modulating gas burners, I either have to or I highly, highly recommend that I would use this stat on there to get the full functionality. What this stat's going to do is not just do like a regular stat does, which is say I would like 1 stage of heat or I would like 2 stages of heat. What this stat does is it sends its current actual temperature to the furnace circuit board, and it also sends its desired set point. So now the furnace knows exactly how far apart the set point is from the actual temperature. It knows it's 0.8 degrees out of set point, or 1.5 or 2 degrees or 0.2 or whatever it is. And it knows how fast it's getting to the goal. So it uses a PID style algorithm, proportional integral derivative algorithm, to calculate how fast am I getting to my goal, or how slowly am I getting there, and should I ramp things up faster or should I back them off. It's basically identical to what your cruise control does in your car. You got it set for 55 miles an hour, because I'm sure you guys are all good law-abiding citizens and you never set your cruise control for 85. If you got locked in on 55, a truck cuts you off, you hit the brakes, you slow down to 30, everything's fine, you hit the resume button on there, and now your car says, well, you want 55, but we're only going 30? Yeah, I'm going to have to gun it. All right, and your car will gun it, but it won't overshoot it. As it gets closer and closer to 55, you can hear it and feel it start backing off the gas pedal, so we land on 55 exactly. The same exact thing is going to happen with temperature when you use this type of thermostat control. We're going to try to land on there exactly by modulating the gas valve or modulating the compressor to get there. Now, additionally, there is another newer unit that I don't have up here on the slide. I probably should have put it on there. I refer to it as the 5-stage unit. There's a 5-stage AC and a 5-stage heat pump unit. I realize that the Bryant and Carrier folks like to call it a variable speed unit, because technically, according to AHRI, anything more than 2 stages is technically considered variable speed. In my mind, I want to call it 5-stage because that makes more sense to me. So we have a 5-stage AC and 5-stage heat pump from both brands that's available now. That particular condensing unit or heat pump can run off a 2-stage stat if you want to do that. But if you do that, it runs in a 2-stage mode. If you want it to run in 5-stage mode, you have to use the Connex control or the touch control in order to make that happen. Right? So there's one where you have to do it, the modulating 61-stage heat pump, and there's 2 where it's highly, highly, highly recommended, which is the modulating gas furnace or the 5-stage AC, in order to get full functionality of that. And of course, all the 2-stage and single-stage equipment that has Infinity and Evolution communications, you could also use it as well. There's obviously cool features with a stat like this. If you're going to buy a communicating high-end stat, they better give you plenty of bells and whistles, right? One thing you'll notice on the bottom of the stat, there's a USB connection. We can use that for several different things. The main thing we'll use it for is loading the dealer contact info. And time permitting, I'll try to show you how to set that up on your thumb drive today. But you can set up a thumb drive with all your contact info and even your company logo. And then when you go out to someone's house and set up a stat, you can just dump it from your thumb drive right into their stat. Whereas in the old stat, you had to go through there 1 digit at a time and keypad all your contact info in, which means that you guys obviously didn't do it because that was a pain in the ass. This thumb drive makes it significantly easier. Additionally, it's the only way to get the contact info on the customer stat, and you have to be on the Bryant or Carrier dealer locator website in order to even get your contact info onto the thumb drive. So only Carrier and Bryant dealers can load their contact info on there. If somebody else did it, if for some weird reason a Lennox dude was servicing a Bryant furnace or whatever, he couldn't put his contact info on there. He'd have to just leave the generic Bryant logo on there or whatever. All right, you can also use that thumb drive the customer can load screensaver photos on there if they want to do that. Some people are into that, some people aren't. It's basically one photo. Instead of going to the normal temperature screen, it goes to a picture of your dog or your grandkids or whatever. Some people like it. It's kind of neat. You could also use it to do your scheduling, but I don't know anybody who does that. Why would you schedule your thermostat through a USB drive when you can just do it over the app, over Wi-Fi, anytime you feel like it? So that's not really a common thing to do. Obviously, there is remote access to this because it is a Wi-Fi controller. With the remote access, the homeowner can see all their settings. They can change schedules, change set points, all that kind of stuff. You can see all the alarm codes. You can set it up to send you email notifications. So we'll go through some of that stuff so you can kind of see what's involved there. For you guys that are a little more veteran to the product, the next 2 or 3 slides just mention what's newer with the latest software versions. We are currently on version 11 of the software. One of the cool things about this stat with the USB connection versus the old ones, with the old, Infinity and Evolution stats, pretty much once you bought it and put it on the wall, you could never update it again, right? You couldn't download any new features. If there was a bug in the software program, which obviously there never was, but if there was, you couldn't, download the fix. You kind of just were frozen in time. Now it's more like your cell phone, right? Anytime there's a new update, you can choose whether you want to update it or not. It's pretty easy. Right now we're currently on version 11, and here's some of the new things that just happened with version 11, which came out earlier this summer. So some of the stuff with the window protect, with the humidifier settings changed a little bit. Celsius display got a little more precise, which doesn't affect most of us on this webinar, but that kind of thing. There was some better labeling, specifically with the fan setting. It used to say off, and off used to mean auto. So you had to explain to people, like, no, your fan's not locked out. When there's a heating and cooling call, the fan will still turn on. So now it says auto instead of off, which is extremely helpful. Although, as you guys probably know, all Infinity and Evolution furnaces and fan coils are variable speed. And with variable speed, you'd be very wise to recommend to your customer to run it in continuous fan mode to get the best air circulation and all that great stuff. But if they want to put it in auto, they can. And now instead of saying off, it says auto. You can change the alert for the G terminal, and we'll talk about that. The ability to change what the text says in the alert is going to be extremely helpful in the widgetiness of what you might be able to offer somebody. Yes, I just made up a word, widgetiness. I do that often. Hopefully you get used to it in the next 2 hours. And a little bit better connectivity to the server. Version 10, which is the previous version that came out last year, the big change there was over-the-air updates. Previously, a dealer had to come to your house with a thumb drive to install the new software if you wanted to upgrade it or needed to upgrade it. Now what happens, once you're on version 10 or later, if there's a new update, such as the version 11 that came out this summer, the thermostat will prompt you, the homeowner, and say, hey, there's an update available. Do you want to download it? Yes or no? And you click on the button, just like your cell phone's done for the past 5+ years. Hey, there's new software for your phone. Do you want to download it? Yes, I do. No, I don't. So that makes it pretty easy. They expanded the G terminal function alert, which I'll explain here in a little while, and a few other things like that. Just real quick, what the over-the-air update looks like. If you have version 10 or later already installed on your stat, and there's a new update available, the homeowner will see a screen like this pop up on the right-hand corner. That orange box on the right-hand side, that is used for any of the alerts. So if there's a problem with your igniter or your condensing unit or whatever, that's where it will pop up at. In this case, it pops up telling you there's new software available. If you were to click on that, it would tell you what software you own today, version 10, what software you want to update to, version 11. You would say yes or you would say no, and you would be allowed to perform that update. If you said yes, it would go ahead and do the update, and it would cycle power, and everything would come back up alive. If you said no, you can choose when you want to be reminded again. How many days from now do you want to be reminded, or never, I don't want to do it kind of thing. And yes, there is a way to go back in, and if you said never, there's a way to go back in and update it anyway later on, manually. Right, so that's been pretty helpful as opposed to dealers having to drive to people's houses to do updates. I'm not going to go through all the version numbers, but we started out with basically version 4 was the first one that we saw here in the field, and we're up to version 11 now over a 3 years time frame. So pretty much, basically at the beginning of a new product, there's lots of updates. Now we're probably every 6 to 9 months probably seeing an update. A couple little things on the consumer end before we talk about more tech stuff. It's a pretty easy stat to use. Basically, you just click on the thing that you want. It's very much like using your cell phone. There's no more buttons on the side you got to play with or down in the bottom. There's no buttons at all on the stat. you just click on the screen the thing you want to change. So if you want to change the set point, you click on the set point. If you want to change the system mode, you click up in the right-hand corner where it says System Auto, and a menu will drop down, and you'll pick heat, cool, auto, fan, or off, that kind of thing. I already mentioned the photo upload you can do with the thumb drive, which some people like that kind of stuff. There are lots of energy-saving features for the homeowner in here as well. The two big ones are the intelligent recovery. Sometimes called, I don't have that on the screen here. I'm just going to mention it. Sometimes manufacturers call it smart recovery, intelligent recovery, optimal start, that sort of thing. And you guys are familiar with that because I've been doing that in thermostats for 12 plus years. Basically, if you want the thermostat to go occupied at 5 p.m., right, the thermostat will start calculating earlier when it needs to turn on to get to set point by 5 p.m. So today it might turn on at 4:15. 3 weeks ago, when it was milder, it may have turned on at 4:50 to get up to temperature by 5 p.m. So the idea is you don't have to hedge your bet and set your thermostat an hour or two earlier than the time you think you need it to come on. You set it for the real time that you want something to happen, and the thermostat will calculate based on the past 3 days worth of history when it needs to really come on and take care of stuff. We got that in this stat just like we've always had it in there. If you don't like it, I'll show you later on where to turn it off. There's another thing that sounds very similar because whoever made the names didn't come up with a new creative name, but it's totally different. It's called Advanced Smart Setback. This is a feature that exists when you are in the away mode, meaning the unoccupied mode. So if you're like me and you're at work right now and you're not going to be at your house from whatever, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., that's your away mode, right? So when you're in the away mode, normally you'd say, oh, I want to maintain, 70 degrees when I'm home and 60 when I'm away, right? That'd be your normal occupied, unoccupied schedule. So you might come home in this case in the middle of the day for whatever reason, you got off work early and you expected your thermostat to be set at 60 and you see that it's maintaining 67. And you're like, well, what the hell? I told it to maintain 60 and it's doing 67 and it's heating right now? That doesn't make any sense. It's a little bit of illogical when you first see it until you know what it's really doing. In fact, at the beginning when we first saw this feature, we were telling guys to turn it off because we didn't know what it was doing. Now we totally get it, right? So what it's trying to do is trying to calculate on multi-stage equipment if it makes more sense to run the furnace in first stage for earlier in the day versus waiting until right before it's time to go occupied and then having to blast to second stage. Obviously, the machine is more efficient when it's running in lower stages of capacity. I have the same size heat exchanger, but a smaller burner. That gives me a better surface-to-burner ratio, which improves my efficiency. Especially with the modulating gas furnace, when I can go from 40 to 100% in 1% increments, I'd much rather run that thing at 40, 50, 60% than have to run it at 80, 90, 100%. So basically what it'll do is it will maybe, in some cases, try to use low firing rates on your burner or even your condensing unit for that matter to try to reduce the amount of energy that it takes to recover out of the setback period. So you might see that feature. It's turned on automatically by default. If you want to turn it off, I will show you later in the service setup, actually in the homeowner setup, where you can turn that off if you don't like it. It's extremely useful on heat pumps, right? Because if a heat pump is coming out of setback, and it tells first stage to go on, which is compression, and second stage, which is compression, and it's still not getting to set point in the next few minutes, it tells the third stage of heat to come on, which is electric resistance backup, which is extremely inefficient, right, which we want to avoid at all costs. We'd much rather the compressor come on an hour early than have electric heat have to kick on. So it's extremely helpful on heat pumps and probably saves people, another $100 to $200 a year on their heat pump operating cost. On a gas furnace, maybe not so much, maybe $30, $40 a year, but still, it's free savings, if you will. But I'll show you where to turn it off if you don't like it, but I would recommend you leave it on for most folks. There's a weather app built into the stat for the consumer. It's not super exciting, right? There's weather apps on your phone and your TV and everything else. So the one cool thing about this, and the one thing that does affect technicians that you got to be aware of, is when I'm looking up at this thermostat on the screen right now, that 77 degrees right there, that does not come from the internet weather app. That comes from the local sensor wired to your condensing unit on the customer's site, right? Everything else comes off the web. So the high and low off the web, the 5-day forecast off the web, the little sunshine in the right-hand corner, which would be nice if it was 77 and sunny today. I mean, nice for personal, not for good business use. But that all comes off the web. The 77 number is the live temperature that's local to their house. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at these things. Later on, after the break today, we'll talk about the web portal for the consumers so that you can see what it takes to set that up. It's not very hard, but you need to know how to do it and what stuff that you might have access to. And then obviously once you put something on the web, it's pretty easy to develop apps for it. So there is an iOS app, which is any Apple product, so iPad, iPhone, iPod Touch, I guess, if you wanted to. And then there's also an Android app available. For whatever reason, if there's an app for something, it means it's cooler than other things, and automatically people want it. There is no BlackBerry app. I've had a couple people ask for that. The only thing I can say is, why do you still have a BlackBerry phone? You're living in 2005. So get an Apple product or get an Android product like the other 98% of the world. I'm just kidding. If you got a BlackBerry, we still love you. I'm just joking. Like I said, this stat is compatible with any Evolution, or on the carrier side, Infinity, furnace, fan coil, condensing unit, or heat pump. If the product is branded as Infinity or Evolution, the equipment is branded that way, this stat will talk to it. Occasionally, you might find some preferred or performance series equipment that might be able to talk to the stat. I'm not going to promise you that it will. You might see a 4-wire ABCD plug on there, and it's not an Evolution piece of equipment. It's preferred series equipment. If you see that plug on there and you want to retrofit this stat on there, give us a call in the tech support group with the model and serial number, and we will make sure that it's going to work. I don't know the exact reason why some of these products ended up with that plug on there. I think it's because of the big $1,500 tax credit money back in the day, and they're trying to get more products into the market very quickly to take advantage of the money. So they're stripping features out of products and releasing, high-end products, stripping features out, releasing them as a mid-tier product. And I think they just didn't take that circuit board out right away. So it's a really rare thing, but if you see it, give us a call. We'll let you know if you can retrofit to or not. But if it's branded as Evolution, you're golden, or Infinity if you're carrier. By the way, don't tell the Carrier and Bryant factory I said this, but if you have a Evolution furnace and you want to put a carrier stat on it, you can do that, and vice versa. So the communication is the same. The stat doesn't know, actually it does know, but it doesn't care that you're talking to the other brand. So it's not very common, but if for some reason you're a carrier dealer and you go out to a Bryant furnace job that nobody's currently servicing and you take over the contract and you sell them a stat, you can pick whether you put a Bryant or a carrier on there, and then vice versa for the other brand. So it does work the same way. I know that some of the people will tell you that it doesn't, but I have them that way working in the lab right now for a couple of years, and it's been no problem. The other thing I'll mention about equipment and this control is basically the homeowner and the service tech's window into what the system is doing, right? It's not the one necessarily doing all of the control. Yes, it's doing part of the control, but a lot of the control is being driven by the furnace circuit board or the condensing unit circuit board, and the thermostat is just your way to access and tweak and look at those things. So the reason I mentioned that is in the literature for the thermostat, you may see features mentioned in there, like I got up on the screen here, low ambient control or auto defrost heat pump mode and things like that. Yeah, the thermostat can do all those things that are listed in the literature, but it can only do the things if that is on the piece of equipment that it's connected to. So if I connect it to an older unit that doesn't have low ambient control, the thermostat doesn't all of a sudden magically make it do that, right? The piece of equipment has to have that feature, and the thermostat just enables the feature, right? So the thermostat can control a modulating gas valve, but if I put it on a 2-stage Infinity unit, it doesn't mean I automatically can modulate it, right? It's still a 2-stage gas valve, that kind of thing. So just kind of pay attention to that a little bit. The other thing about this thermostat is you can use it in a zoned or a non-zoned system, right? So the old Infinity and Evolution thermostats, the vertical white ones, those guys, you had to buy it in either a zoned or non-zoned version, and you had to know which one you needed in advance. This new one, it's one thermostat that does everything. They put both programs into the stat. The thermostat, during setup, if it sees a zoning board, it'll configure itself for a zoning configuration. If it doesn't see a zoning board, it'll configure itself as just a regular non-zone, single-zone system, right? So here's a typical single-zone system. Obviously, the thermostat's going to control the furnace or the fan coil. In fact, like I mentioned, you have to have a communicating furnace or fan coil. It'll control the condensing unit as well, or heat pump, depending on what you have. If you have a humidifier, it'll control that. If you have an ERV, and the ERV is a Carrier or Bryant ERV that has the fan speed input on it, the 4-wire fan speed input on it, then this thermostat, through the proper board, which I'll talk about in a little while, will be able to control the fan speeds of your ERV. If you got that new bolt-on ERV, it doesn't have fan speed control, so obviously it can't do that one. But the other Carrier and Bryant ERVs, it can. If you got a Renew Air or a Life Breath or whatever ERV, obviously it can't control the fan speeds of those either because they speak a different language, right? So generally speaking, if you want an ERV, we recommend you use a Carrier Bryant ERV, even though we rep multiple brands here. We'll recommend that because the stat will be able to control it all nice and easy for you. Down the bottom left-hand side, it doesn't control your filter. There's nothing really to control, but it does monitor your filter. So during the setup, which we'll do in a little bit here, it'll ask you what kind of filter do you have. Do you have an air purifier? Do you have a regular media cartridge filter? Do you have an electrostatic air cleaner? Right? What do you have? The reason he asked that question, the thermostat asked that question, is it wants to know what expected pressure drop it's going to see when this filter's clean and when it's dirty, so it can tell you when the filter's dirty. The thermostat knows the pressure drop of your system. It knows it at startup time, it knows it next week, it knows the following week, it knows it a month later, it knows it 6 months later, and then it'll tell you when the filter's dirty based on the actual static pressure drop across the filter. It actually measures it. Now, you don't have to install any special sensors to measure it. It does it inherently on its own. So if you didn't know, most variable speed ECM motors have the ability to run in a constant CFM mode, right? They can be programmed that way at the factory, which all of ours are, and it will maintain a certain CFM through the system no matter what. If the filter gets dirty, the fan will ramp up to get the CFM we need. If someone shuts a register, the fan will ramp up to get the CFM we need, that sort of thing. Actually, ramp down, excuse me. So we'll always get the rated CFM that we want. That ECM motor knows the CFM, it knows the RPM, and it knows the static pressure. The big difference with Infinity and Evolution versus other ECM furnaces is that that motor actually talks back to the furnace circuit board to tell us that data. So most variable speed furnaces, the furnace tells the motor what it wants, and that's it. The motor does its thing, and everybody's happy. We still do that, but then the motor actually gives us feedback data as well and says, hey, yeah, I'm doing what you want, but by the way, your CFM is this, your static pressure is that, and your RPM is this. It gives us that data. The easiest way to sort of explain it, I don't know if this is the best way or not, but it's the easiest way. So the motor's spinning, doing its thing. The motor temporarily disengages the blower wheel from the shaft, and then the back pressure of the duct system is pushing resistance against that wheel, and because I'm no longer motorizing the wheel starts to slow down a little bit. This is over a couple milliseconds, right? You don't even notice it. It starts to slow down a little bit, and then based on that RPM reduction and knowing the fan curve, we can calculate the CFM and the static pressure. So the ECM motor does all that, tells the furnace, and we got the data. It doesn't control your UV light like it shows in the right-hand corner there, but there is an alert on there based on so many years, right? If you got a 1 year or 2 year bulb or whatever, a 3 year bulb, it'll warn you and tell you it's time to change your bulb. If you have a zone system, it's a little bit more exciting. We use the same exact thermostat. It just configures itself a little bit differently, and that becomes the thermostat for zone number 1. For zones number 2, 3, and 4, you can either use the remote room sensor like I'm showing there, which is that plain white sensor, or you can use a smart sensor, which is a sensor that has a little LCD screen on it. And I apologize, this one is shown in silver, but now I believe they're all shipping with white. But that's a whole, that's not a service thing, that's a whole marketing thing, right? I don't really care what color it is. But just so you know, you can pick and choose for zones 2 through 4 whether you want the little white cube or whether you want the one with the interface and the buttons on it. So I might have a zone like my kid's bedroom. Yep, nope, no buttons for you guys. Right? Then my master bedroom, yeah, I want buttons. When I'm hot, I want to get up and change the setting on my stack. Or better yet, I want to pick up my phone off the nightstand and change it from there. Right? So you can do that. You can pick and choose your remote sensors. If you want to have more than 4 zones, you can have an expansion board added in, and then the zoning board can handle up to 8 zones maximum. If you need more than 8 zones on one furnace, you're doing something wrong. You've sized this system incorrectly, and we need to rethink about how you're laying out this whole project, this whole house. So that's on the zoning system. We got individual dampers, each wiring back to a main zone board, which I'll show you in a second. And then I got these sensors in the space. The remote room sensor is a 2-wire device. It's just a dumb thermistor. The smart sensor is a 4-wire device. It uses the same ABCD cable that the user interface and the condensing unit, the furnace, and everybody uses. Right? 2 for communication, 2 for power. With that being said, I always tell everybody for the remote room sensors, pull 4 wires. That way when someone comes back to you 2 months later and says, yeah, you know that smart sensor thing you talked about for my master bedroom? Yeah, I want that now. And you're like, but I only pulled 2 wires. If you pull them forward, it's an easy upgrade, an easy sale. The cost of the wire is negligible relative to the labor cost. In fact, I would just pull 5 wires because, as you guys know, if you pull an extra wire for everything, it's probably just smarter in general. I'm just going to skip that one. The thermostat, there's actually currently 3 different models for it. Actually, there's even more than 3 models, but some of them are phasing out. So as you guys know with Bryant and Carrier numbers, when you put that -A at the end, that really means it's kind of like revision 2 of the hardware. So we're getting really close to revision 2. I don't think we have it in stock yet, but if we don't, we will have it fairly soon. So for right now, if you want to remove the A off the end, that's fine too. So the first thing you'll notice is the third one on the screen there is a non-Wi-Fi version of the stat. You will see that mentioned in some of the literature. We don't normally stock that one at TEC. We kind of decided, well, anybody who's going to buy, a $12,000 furnace and AC high-end system that you install probably isn't looking to save 40, 50 bucks on a thermostat. They probably want the Wi-Fi version, right? So we figured we'd just do it that way, and that's the way we stock it. With that being said, for warranty purposes on the old style non-touchscreen stats, as those are running out of inventory for warranty purposes, the new warranty replacement for that will be this non-Wi-Fi version. So you'll get a touch to replace your old one, but it will not have Wi-Fi in it for warranty purposes. Of the Wi-Fi ones, there's 2 model numbers listed at the top there, one with a router and one without a router. And the router is shown on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen there. The purpose of that router originally was twofold. The first purpose was in the thermostat itself, the Wi-Fi chip that they had selected to use originally 3 or 4 years ago, whatever it was fairly slow. And they probably figured, hey, no big deal. It's just thermostat data and there's not a lot of it, so the speed is kind of irrelevant. No one would notice anyway, which is true, except for the problem is on a Wi-Fi network, everybody on the Wi-Fi network has to slow down to the speed of the slowest guy, right? So if you're just checking your email from your phone or your laptop or whatever, no big deal. You would never notice anything. Even surfing the web, you would never notice anything. But as soon as you start trying to stream Netflix videos or doing some online gaming or anything like that, if your thermostat is slowing down the speed of your ability to watch your video, you're probably not going to be too happy. So that was the first reason why we put the thermostat on its own router separate from the customer's Wi-Fi router. So the Wi-Fi router the customer has does all their stuff. This Wi-Fi router did our stuff, and everybody was separate. The second reason to have a dedicated router was it made it really easy for the dealer to install. Right? I didn't have to get your password from you, which you probably didn't know anyway, and you had to go ask your grandkid what it was, right, or your wife or whatever. I just flipped the router over and the password's on the bottom of the router. Makes it really easy to set up. With that being said, the new -A version of the thermostats has a faster chip in it now, so we don't have to separate it out onto its own router. You could put it right on the customer's router if you want to. So there are 2 different model numbers, one bundled with the router, one without. I believe we are switching to the one without as our inventory at TEC. Other part number on here, and by the way, for the Carrier folks, just take the B's out of the part number and replace them with 2 C's there in the middle. Instead of BB, put CC, and then that's your part number. Actually, that's not quite true. Some of them are different. If you need the Carrier part numbers and you don't have them, let me know, and I will email them to you later. I apologize for that. There is a decorative backplate or goof plate or whatever you want to refer to it as. That's the same part number for both Carrier and Bryant. It is a plain vanilla white backplate, fairly large. It's large enough so that when you take off the old vertical Infinity or Evolution stat and you put on this new horizontal touchscreen one, it can cover up what was there before. The bad news about those old vertical ones, and you guys always yelled at us for it, is that most of the stuff you take off the wall in terms of a regular thermostat is horizontal. You take that off the wall, you put the new Infinity one on the wall, it was vertical, and then you had to become, a painting artist, which, just for the record, all HVAC guys suck at drywall and we suck at painting, so it wasn't very ideal. So that's why the backplates are pretty helpful. The good news is we're now back to horizontal. This will cover up most stuff you take off the wall, unless you take off an old Infinity or Evolution control, then it doesn't cover it. So that's why the backplate's there. For you guys that are service techs in the field, I recommend you have one of these on your truck. Because no offense to the sales guys, but the chance of the sales guy thinking to order that, along with the 50 billion other widgets he's ordering for the job, pretty low, right? Just have one on your truck. When you use it, get another one. If you guys have any questions, type them in the question/chat box, and I will try to answer them as we go. And if it's something that's going to come up later, I'll mention that. Otherwise, I'll try to answer it on the fly. I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll question right now. If you're doing this for FAD credit, make sure you answer this poll question. It's not hard. It's just to make sure that you're alive and you're not sleeping, basically. All right, so that poll question, which I can't even read. I made it so tiny. I'm hoping you guys can read it. But all infinity, where's it at? There you go. Now it's on my screen. I can see. True or false? All infinity evolution furnaces are compatible with the touch Wi-Fi control. So just click on true or click on false, and we'll wait about a minute here, and then we'll see what the poll results are. Still waiting on a few folks to vote. Only half of you have voted, so go ahead and answer the question if you can, especially if you need the hours. I'll leave it open for another 10 seconds, and hopefully we get all you guys. If anybody has any of their own questions to ask me, please type them in the question chat box down in the bottom right-hand corner, and I will try to answer them as they come up. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And it looks like about 2/3 of you guys got it correct, which is true. All the Infinity furnaces can be used with a touchscreen control. Same with the Evolution. Even if they're old ones from 2006 or whatever, they will be compatible. Anywhere you can use the old Infinity or Evolution control, you can use the new Infinity or Evolution control. All right, let's switch back over to the presentation slides. And we'll keep on moving. So there's up to 5 programming periods per day, 7-day programming as you'd expect. If you don't want 7-day, you can set it up as a 5+2. It's pretty easy to do that. And if you don't need 5 periods per day, you don't have to configure them all. If you only need 2 or 3 or whatever, you can just configure it that way, and the other ones can be grayed out. So it's up to 5 and up to 7-day programmability. So it's pretty flexible in that regard. If you don't want programming at all, you can just turn off the programming, and then they never have to see that again. As you probably know, especially in the state of Illinois, statewide code, energy code, requires you to provide programmable thermostats with each furnace or fan coil that you install. It's not a choice thing. It's the state law. With that being said, if someone doesn't want to program it, I mean, it'd be hard to force someone to program if they don't want to. So if you want to turn the programmability off, you can do that. The law says you got to put it in, but if the homeowner doesn't want to program it, then you can't force them. Lead the horse to water kind of thing. It will control the temperature, obviously, as you would expect. This thermostat also controls the humidity, both humidification and dehumidification, and we'll talk about that. It only controls the humidification if you have a humidifier, obviously. It controls the dehumidification on all Infinity and Evolution systems. And then if you have a Bryant or Carrier ERV, it'll also control the ventilation air capacity. All right? There's plenty of reminders that can pop up for people. UV light bulb changes, filter reminder changes. There's also the alarms that of an actual failure type item. Those things could pop up as well. In terms of wiring, this is what our typical wiring looks like. It's not very complicated, especially compared to what you'd be doing with a normal thermostat. The beauty of the Evolution and Infinity control is that compared to other systems that have as many features, you only have 4 wires going on. Right? I'm sure all you guys have wired up a thermostat or a Honeywell equivalent of that or something like that, and you got 7, 8, 9, 11 wires going on for 2 stages of heat, 2 stages of cool, humidification, dehumidification, right? All the time you add all that stuff up, it's a lot of wires. This is always 4 wires. So like I said, from the thermostat, you have A, B, C, D. That goes over to the furnace. And then from the furnace to the condensing unit, you have A, B, C, D again, same ones. On some condensing units, like I mentioned, you do not need C and D. You will know which ones they are because A, there'll be a transformer in the outdoor unit to power up its circuit board. And B, instead of saying C and D on the condensing unit, they'll probably say C, and then for the 4th terminal, it'll say not used or no use. Something like that, instead of having a D on the printed circuit board. And typically that's going to be on newer units that are 2-stage and higher. On the user interface, you also do have a 5th and 6th terminal that are optional. There's a little block-off plate on them, so you wouldn't use them unless you really needed to. That's for an optional remote room sensor. If for some reason your thermostat was in not a great location, you can put a remote sensor somewhere else. Or if you wanted to hide it in the closet and then put a smaller sensor on the wall, you could do that kind of thing. The humidifier does not wire to the thermostat. It wires to the furnace circuit board, to the HUM terminal and common. So when there's a humidity call from the thermostat, it sends a data packet over the green and yellow wire and lets the furnace know, hey, I need humidification, and the furnace will close the relay for HUM and COM terminal. The furnace also has an optional outside air connection on it for outside air thermistor. You normally don't need that because the condensing unit has one built in. However, if you have a non-communicating condensing unit, then you'd have to order and install an OAT and wire it to the furnace. Or if you have one on the condensing unit, but it's in a horrible location, the condensing unit's on the south side of the house and the sun is just beating on the side of the cabinet that has the sensor, I may choose to disconnect that sensor from the condensing unit and wire one to the furnace instead. Or I can leave it wired to the condensing unit and just relocate it to the other side of the condensing unit and zip tie it to the grill or something like that where it's not in the direct sunlight. Either way, if I choose to wire one to the furnace, I have to disconnect the one at the condensing unit. I cannot wire one to both. It'll get confused and it won't know which one to use. So it's one or the other, furnace or condensing unit, you can wire it to. The thermistors, whether it's for outside air sensor or remote room sensing, if you have that option, it's just a dumb thermistor. It's not smart, right? So I just pass a voltage out on the wire. Whatever resistance I measure, I calculate that a number of ohms of resistance, and I correlate that to a table that tells me my temperature. These are 10K ohm resistors, which means at room temperature, which is 77 degrees Fahrenheit, it's going to read 10,000 ohms. If it gets warmer in the space, say 80 degrees, then instead of 10,000 ohms, I might read, I'm going to make up a number because I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, 9,500 ohms. And if it's cooler in the space, say 75, then I might read whatever, 11,000 ohms. There's a whole table you can look at to see what that correlation is if you want to do it. You can also disconnect these wires off of the sensor and put your multimeter on there and set it to ohms, which is the little Indianapolis Colts horseshoe on there. Set it to ohms and measure the resistance on there, and then look at the table to see what it thinks it is and make sure that's what you're reading on your device. But it's really stupid. It doesn't take any intelligence. It's just a little thermistor, and you can wire it either way. Polarity does not make a difference whatsoever on a thermistor. So you can swap the red and white wires on here, and it would not make any difference at all. If you choose an optional smart sensor for zones 2 through 8, or just even one of those, you'll have a display like this. It'll require the 4 wires, A, B, C, D, going to it. You can either wire them in daisy chain fashion, or you can home run them all back to the panel. It doesn't matter either way. In addition to being able to change the temperature from that local zone, you can also change its fan speed. Right? Now, in reality, you know the zone damper doesn't have a fan in it, so you're not really changing the zone damper's fan speed. You're actually changing its CFM. So when you click on that fan control, and you switch between low, medium, high, and auto, you're really telling it low CFM, medium CFM, high CFM, or automatic CFM. But if we put CFM on the screen, people wouldn't know what that meant. If we said airflow, they probably wouldn't know what that meant. If we say fan, people kind of get that. They all got a ceiling fan with a pull chain. They know what low, medium, and high means. So you can go ahead and switch it here. As the dampers change position here by doing this, it will actually affect the fan speed of the furnace because it will change the static resistance in the duct. And then as we explained earlier, the furnace is tracking the static pressure and it'll adjust accordingly. By the way, when you have a zoning system for Infinity or Evolution, there is no bypass damper involved. Not only do you not require one, it's prohibited. You cannot use a bypass damper on an Infinity and Evolution system. The reason is that unlike other brands of variable speed furnace, this zoning system takes control of the fan speed. And as the number of zones shut down, there's less open, we slow down the fan speed, right, to provide less CFM to the system, right? So when we do that is twofold. When the zones are shutting down for temperature reason, or if someone's changing the fan speed on the smart sensor, we back off the dampers. We got to measure that static resistance at the fan, and we slow down the blower accordingly. So no bypass damper, which is ideal because if I have a bypass, as soon as I say the word bypass, that means energy inefficient. It means I run my fan at maximum airflow and I bypass it, which does not save me any energy. If I slow the fan down, not only do I get less noise and better comfort, but I also get lower energy consumption and less freeze trip alerts. This is what the zoning board looks like, and I could put a second board on top of it if I want to expand up to 8 zones. Like I mentioned, the remote room sensors are 2-wire. The smart sensors are 4-wire. I'm going to see if I can get my little red dot going on here, and hopefully you guys can see the red dot. Over here on the right-hand side is where my 2-wire remote room sensors would wire if I had them. Up on the top left here, I have two ABCD blocks. These are identical. They are soldered together on the back of the board. It doesn't matter which one you wire to, but at some point in time, this has to connect on the ABCD communication bus, which ties in the evolution control and the furnace and the condensing unit and the smart sensors if I have them. The reason they give you two blocks here is because if you start using smart sensors, it's kind of hard to jam 3 or 4 wires under one, so you can divide it and put 2 pairs under here and 2 pairs under the next one. Down the left-hand side of the board, which is not wired in this particular example, but this is where the dampers would wire to, they are 3-wire dampers. There's a common wire, there's an open signal, and there's a closed signal. This is a little bit different than some other zoning systems, for example, like an old Troll Temp or a Honeywell True Zone or something like that. Those are 2-wire systems. But because they're 2 wires, they cannot modulate. They are just open, closed. Basically, there's a spring on the damper motor that springs open, and then when the zone calls for something to happen, it powers it closed. So it powers all the way closed to 0% open, or it springs open to 100%. With Infinity Evolution, it does not work that way. We modulate the damper. So we got that open, closed, and common signal on there. And what we'll do is if we want to open some, we'll send a voltage signal out on the open and common pairing. And then the damper will open a little bit. Then we'll release the voltage signal and we'll do nothing, and the damper will pause where it's at. And then we can pulse open again if we want, pulse a little more open, or we can go and pulse the closed one. So basically keep pulsing this open or pulsing it closed to tweak it. So it's basically a modulating damper. I think technically it's like a 16-step motor or something like that, but for the purpose of this discussion, it's modulating. But that's why we need a 3rd wire on there. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Back to my normal mouse. I will skip that one. This is what the condensing unit looks like. This is a typical Infinity or Evolution condensing unit. Down the bottom right-hand board is our communication board, and you can see over there the ABCD terminal on it. That's where I would wire my communications at, where my red dot's at over there. And right over here below that, you can see where my outdoor air sensor is poking through the bottom of the control enclosure, trying to sense the outdoor ambient air. Right. This one, as you can tell, does not have a transformer in the cabinet. Right. So this is an older style one, and this guy will definitely require the 4 wires ABCD. If I had a transformer in here, he would not, and the terminal will be labeled ABC no use. And I'll show you what that terminal looks like in a little bit. There's the outside air sensor poking through the bottom. We use that outside air sensor for multiple things. For one, we display it on the thermostat, as I told you earlier, and we display it on the smart sensor. For 2, if you have a dual fuel system, we'll use this sensor for the auto changeover between the heat pump and the gas furnace. If you have a heat pump, we will use it for the auto defrost mode, which we'll talk about a little later on. And if you have a humidifier, we'll use it for the window protect mode. This is kind of what things look like for the window protect mode. I'll see if I can get the spotlight going again. Right, so if I put it in the manual mode, then over here where it says 25%, I can go up and down and change my humidifier setting. And then it's locked in at that setting and it never changes. If I put it in the window protect mode, then instead of having this up and down for 25%, now the up and down moves this little slider on the right between the less and the more. Now the numbers 1 through 9 are not on the screen. That's just for our purposes today. But the 1 through 9 on here correspond to the chart over on the left. So by default, it's at the middle position, which is the number 5, right? And on the chart, I have temperature of outdoor air on the bottom from -20 to 50 degrees. And up the left, I have humidifier set point from 0 to 45. Let's say right now, today, it's, 25 degrees or something out, and I'm on curve 5. If I go up 25 degrees to curve 5, I got a 40% humidifier set point, right? Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. If it gets colder outside, let's say it's 5 degrees, now I have a 27% humidifier set point. If it's -5, I got a 22% humidifier set point, or whatever it comes out to be. If that's causing their windows to fog up, then I would need to go to the less arrow. I'd move this slider down 1 or 2 positions. Let's say I move it down to number 3. Then on a 25-degree day, instead of being 40% humidity, on number 3, I'm at 27% humidity, right? I'm following this number 3 curve instead, right? So I'm basically picking which curve I'm following here. The homeowner doesn't really think of it that way. They just know more or less. These are the curves that correspond to it. From a technician standpoint, at startup, by default, it's going to be on position 5, which is fine for lots of houses, but not everybody's house, right? The crappier the windows are, if they're single pane or double pane, if there's air leaking around them or not, all that makes a difference on whether they're going to have condensation on them, right? If I have a cold piece of glass and I have moisture on the inside, it's going to have a condensation issue in lots of cases. Specifically, if it's, say, a really, really cold day, minus 10 degrees outside, and I have a single pane piece of glass, if it's minus 10 on the outside of the glass, the inside of the glass is generally about 10 degrees, right? If I have a double pane piece of glass, or one pane with a storm window, or whatever you want to think of it, and it's minus 10 outside, now the inside surface of my glass is about 46, 47 degrees, right? So that double pane piece of glass makes a big difference on whether the temperature is going to be really cold on the glass surface on the inside or not. The colder the glass on the inside is, the more likely I am to have a condensation issue. My two choices are to warm the glass up, which is hard to do because now I got to heat the outdoors to warm the glass, right? Or blow air directly on every piece of glass, or lower my humidifier set point, right? So the condensation issue is a function of glass temperature and humidity. So we're doing it by lowering the humidity set point. 5 is a good starting point. If they have crappy windows, meaning single pane glass or super leaky frames, then you're probably going to want to go to number 3 as your starting point. In both those cases, it's probably the wrong starting point, but you don't know where to start until it actually gets cold outside. Once it gets cold outside, you can adjust this, and after the first time you adjust it, then it'll be fine. It'll track the curve and everything's great. You will need to show the homeowner where to go up and down on this bar, so on the first really cold day, they can adjust it. I would argue that in most cases, you don't need to go higher than 5 into the 6, 7, 8, 9 category in many cases, because in a lot of those cases, if you're talking about houses that can handle the condensate on the windows, which means it's probably a really tight house with really good windows, and then I would argue that you probably don't even need a humidifier in a lot of those cases, right? Maybe you do it sometimes, but a lot of times you probably won't. But you have the flexibility here to do your job the way you want to do your job. So that's the outside air reset. Some of the accessories, there's a NIM module that's available, network interface module. It's one of 2 optional cards you can get for this unit. The other one, which we're not going to talk about today, is for a purpose of communicating to a building automation system, a home automation system. That's a whole other conference call, right? Different topic. But today we do need to talk about the NIM. The NIM is what I would use if I need to get something that's 2 stages and doesn't communicate to work for an outdoor unit. So communicating outdoor units, I'm golden. I don't need anything. I run the 4-wire data cable outside, or 2 wires in some cases, and I'm done. If I have a 1-stage condensing unit outside, I run the Y and C wire from the furnace to the condensing unit. Boom, I'm done. If I have 2 stages of AC not communicating, that's when I got to use this card. Now, in general, I would say you would not want to sell a system that way. If you're selling a new system and you're going to put in a 2-stage non-communicating preferred or performance series unit and then sell them this $200 and some card, you might as well just sold them an Infinity system and been done with it, right? Or an Evolution system. But if they have a 2-stage Lennox unit from 3 years ago and you're putting a new furnace in with an Infinity controller, well, they're probably not going to throw away their three-year-old Lennox unit, right? So you're probably stuck with that, and you want to make the 2 stages work. This is how you make it work. You run the ABCD cable on this guy from your thermostat or from your furnace over to the ABCD on the NIM input right down here on the bottom. And then up here on the top side, I'd be able to wire my 1st and 2nd stage cooling to the outdoor unit. So if I have a 2-stage non-communicating outdoor AC, then I need a NIM card. Or if I have a single-stage non-communicating heat pump, I would need it, because that guy also needs 2 relays, one for the compressor, one for the reversing valve. The furnace only has 1 spare relay to use. Y1, that's it. If I need 2 spare relays, Y1 and Y2, or Y1 and reversing valve, or anything like that, then I got to go to the NIM card. The third time you might use a NIM card is if you want to connect an ERV, a Carrier Bryant ERV, and control its fan speed. You would do it through here. If you have a zoning board, it's already built in. You don't have to do it on here. But if you don't have a zoning board and you want an ERV, you got to get this card. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. All right, if anybody has any questions, please type them in. I'll be happy to try to answer them the best that I can. So far, you guys have been super quiet, so either I'm super boring or I'm super awesome, one or the other. Don't tell me which one. Just ask me questions if you have any. I'm going to pop up another poll question here while I catch my breath. The poll question is, true or false, all Infinity Evolution controls must have a dedicated router from Carrier Bryant? All right, looks like almost everybody's voted. I'll give it another 10 seconds for the last few folks that have not. Remember, if you need FAD credit hours for service technical category, you definitely want to answer poll questions. All right, I'm going to close it in 3, 2, 1. All right, I'll show you the results. You all got it correct, which is true. You do not have to have a dedicated router. You can use the homeowner's existing router. If you have, you may want to have a dedicated router just to A, make it easier for you to install, or B, with the non-A chip to not slow their network down. But you don't have to do that. It can go on the existing router if you wish. All right, we're going to go for about another 10 minutes or so, then we'll take a short intermission here. That should be about a halfway point. Actually, a little more than halfway. All right, so I got all that stuff to talk about, and we talked about wiring it, and everybody's good. Now I'm going to power this thing up, right? So when I first power this system up, the first thing the thermostat's going to do is start searching for equipment. He basically sends little messages out on the data cable saying, hey, is there an indoor unit there? And if there's an indoor unit, which there better be because you have to have one, it'll report back and say, yeah, you know what, I'm a 58 MCA, 3-stage gas variable speed furnace, and I'm this many BTUs, and that's what I am. And then the thermostat will say, hey, is there a condensing unit out there? And then if there's a condensing unit that communicates, it'll report back, right? And we'll kind of go down that path. I'll just keep asking who's there, who's there, who's there. If it doesn't find a communicating condensing unit, well, first of all, if it doesn't find a communicating indoor unit, you're done. You can't go any further. It has to have a communicating indoor unit, or you can't use this product. So that way then you have to go troubleshoot, well, did I wire something wrong or whatever. If I can't find a communicating outdoor unit, the first thing I would look at is, well, do I have a communicating outdoor unit? If I do, is it powered up and those sorts of things? If I don't have one, that's fine. You don't have to, like we just mentioned. But then the thermostat's going to ask me, hey, what's the BTUs of your outdoor unit? Or do you not even have cooling on this system, right? So you probably do have cooling. What are the BTUs? Why does the thermostat want to know the BTUs? The reason he wants to know the BTUs is because he's going to use that to set up the cooling airflows. You may or may not realize it, but on an Infinity or Evolution furnace, the dip switches on the furnace become disabled when I put one of these stats on there. The stat takes control of the dip switches, and they don't do anything. They become stupid. They're just there, but they don't do anything. Now, if you have an existing system and you already set the dip switches on it and everything was good, and then 2 years later you upgrade them to an Infinity stat, the stat will go out, read the current dip switch positions, and bring them into the stat and use them. And then after that, we'll completely ignore the switches and they don't work anymore. So the very first time you power it up, it reads the switches. After that, the switches are disabled and they don't do anything. And all dip switch configuration is done from the thermostat service screens, which we'll show you in a little bit here. So it'll ask you for the BTUs of the outdoor unit if it can't find a communicating one, because it wants to know how to set up the indoor airflow. It'll also then ask you what type of filter you have, and you have 3 choices. You either have a media filter, right, which is just an regular air filter. It doesn't matter if it's a 1-inch or a 4-inch. For right now, it's just you just basically pick that. It'll ask you, or do you have an electronic air cleaner, right? Because an electronic air cleaner has extremely low pressure drop, so we need to adjust our dirty filter alarming based on that. Or do you have an air purifier, right? So an Evolution or Infinity air purifier, or a Performance or Preferred Series air purifier. It's asking that because those guys, they load the filters differently, as you know, and they got the whole electrostatic charge. That's a whole other topic for another webinar. But they basically have a different lifespan than a regular filter has, and they typically last longer for the most part. So it'll base those decisions on that, and then it'll use that information that you told it, what kind of filter you have, in order to give you the dirty filter alarms. If for some reason you don't want the dirty filter alarms to be based on pressure, and normally you want this, but if you didn't, you would come over to the stat over here, and you click on the enable, or excuse me, disable button, and now it doesn't care what kind of filter you have. It goes into a filter timer from anywhere from 1, I think, to 18 months or something like that. There is no way to turn the filter alarming off. All right? You have to basically say, I want it to be a monthly timer or TrueSense dirty filter, which means I'm going to measure the pressure. One caution I'll mention with this, there is one specific model of furnace. It's a 986TA. I know the note on here says 986T, but it's 986TA. Does not have the ability to do this dirty filter alarming. It's still an Evolution furnace. It still communicates. Everything's great. It just doesn't do the dirty filter alarming because the type of motor that it has, the type of variable speed motor it has, doesn't have the ability to communicate backwards to the furnace board and tell it the airflow. It still does the airflow. It still tracks it. It still speeds up and slows down. It just can't tell us the information. So therefore, it can't tell us when the filter is dirty. Likewise, because of that, it cannot be used with evolution zoning because the zoning system also needs to know the airflows and static, right? So if you've got 986TA, which is no longer manufactured, they stopped making that furnace. But if you have that one, you cannot use evolution zoning on it, and you can't get the dirty filter alarms. All the other features will work just fine. Just wanted to point that one model number out. All right, it'll also then ask you what other IAQ devices you have. Do you have a humidifier, yes or no? If you do, how often do you want to change the pad? How many months? And then do you want to humidify with fan, yes or no? Traditionally, we turn the humidifier on when there's a heat call, right? We've done it that way for decades. What you can do here optionally is if you want, if you say yes to the humidify with fan, if there's a humidity call, but temperature is happy and there's no heat call, the thermostat will force the blower on in the furnace to get airflow moving and then go ahead and engage the humidifier. You can pick yes or no if you want this to happen, right? For the UV light, yes or no, do you have one? And how often do you want to change the bulb? Typically, it's published as a 1, 2, or 3-year bulb, 1 year being the most common. So you'd have that alarm go off after 12 months. If you're using other bulb-based products that are not technically, quote-unquote UV lights, they do other stuff too, like, for example, RGF. That's fine. If it was me, I'd go ahead and use this alarm reminder because the chance of Bryant or Carrier putting an RGF reminder on here is pretty low. So I'd use the UV as my reminder for those products as well. If it senses a zoning board on the ABCD cable, it'll configure that zoning board and it'll go out and look for sensors, right? Do you have smart sensors or remote sensors and which zones do you have them wired on? And it'll give you a little report like the one we have here. Then it'll ask you if you want to custom name these things. You can pick names from a drop-down menu, kitchen, bedroom 1, bedroom 2, that kind of thing. Or you can custom name them, Johnny's room, Susie's room, whatever. You can pick and choose those. The furnace itself does a static pressure check at startup. So when you first initialize the system, you're going to see this happening. It'll come back and it'll report to you what the static pressure was, what the CFM was, and what the RPM was. The data it collected off of that motor. Now, hopefully you don't have a half-inch of static with no airflow, right? I think some of the factory marketing folks created these slides for us, and they didn't really know what numbers to put in. So hopefully you don't have a half-inch of static with zero airflow, but you guys kind of get the idea. If you have a zoning system, it'll not only do that same exact check, but then it'll go ahead and do another check. It'll close all the dampers down except for zone number 1, and it'll do the same static check. Then it'll do it on number 2 by himself, number 3 by himself, each one individually. So I know how much air is going to each individual room. It says it could be up to 10 minutes on here. The newer ones take less time. It also depends on how many zones you have, right? If you have only 3 zones, it's only going to take a couple minutes. If you got 8 zones, it's probably going to take 6, 7, 8 minutes, right? Just less zones, less time. You'll get a report that looks like this, telling you where all your air is going, right? We know the total CFM. We now know the CFM of each individual zone. We can tell you how much air is going to each one of those zones, right? Like we're showing you here. And then the air we can't account for, I got 1,000 CFM, and I only can see 890 CFM going out to individual zones. That means the other 110 is leakage. I don't know where it's going. And by the way, this is just leakage from the furnace to the zone dampers themselves. Any leakage after the zone damper, that's counted in the zone number. So how much leakage do I have in my plenum or my main trunk is basically what this number is. And by the way, 11% is actually a pretty decent job. Some of the ones that we've been seeing, 25, 30, 35, 40% leakage is pretty bad. So you guys that do duct sealing type work or aero sealer and that kind of stuff, you can use this as a way to kind of show people what their leakage is and maybe help them fix some problems. So this kind of just gives you an example. I'm not going to go through it, but we know the speeds that the furnace is operating at during the testing time, and we test it with the different zones. So we know how much air is going into the duct, we know how much air is coming out of all the zones, and we can therefore account for, well, what do we miss? In this example, 12%. All right, so it's not too hard there. All right, we're going to take a very short break, like 3-4 minutes, and then we'll resume back up. So this is your chance to go get a water or a bathroom break, or for me to rest my voice, etc. So we'll be back in 3 minutes. All right. Hopefully everybody's back. All right, we're going to continue on down the path here. We got a few more screens to talk about in terms of what the homeowner would see, and then we're going to go through all the service screens pretty much one by one, so everybody knows what all those different settings mean. All right, from the customer's perspective, this is what the home screen looks like. And actually, just for sake of argument, if you guys could do me a quick favor and just type in if you can hear me again after the break, so I don't talk for 5 minutes and then find out I'm disconnected or anything. Must mean you can't hear me. Okay. Now guys are typing in. All right, cool. We're live on audio again. All right, so the homeowner is going to have this main screen that they're going to be able to see. It'll show them the current temperature, the weather forecasting on the bottom, if it's heating or cooling mode, etc. They touch anywhere on this stat, it'll pull up the quote-unquote main screen, which looks like this. From here, they can change their set points. They can go to the hold mode if they really want to. They can change their system mode from auto to heat to cool to fan only, all that good stuff. You'll also notice there's a little eye down in the bottom of all these screens, a little information button. If you click on that, you'll get an information screen. Now, the one for the main screen here, it's pretty lame. It just says this is the main screen, which is not very exciting. But some of the more screens that are more complicated, it's fairly useful. And it's even available in most of the service screens now. And we'll talk about that a little bit too. So from the main screen, I can change the normal things I'd want to do, change the set points, the mode, that kind of thing. I can also press this menu button in the bottom right-hand corner. And if I do that, I guess I have one more screen on there. If you press the hold button, it'll actually ask you how long you want to hold it for. And even now, that more than my screen, there's more choices now. Now you can pick hold till the next schedule, hold for a certain number of hours, or hold forever. My screen's a little bit old, though. If I press the menu button, I'll have 2 pages of menu stuff. There's a bottom arrow here I can scroll down between the two, or an up arrow where I can scroll up between the two. The first thing you'll notice is the scheduling is a little bit weird, I guess, for HVAC folks, but it's been very, very useful for homeowners. They divided the scheduling into 2 different things. There's a comfort profile. That's where you tell the system what you like. I like this temperature when I'm sleeping, this when I'm awake, this when I'm gone. And then unrelated to that, you tell it when you're asleep, when you're awake, and when you're gone. It seems kind of weird to make it do it in 2 places, but it makes it a lot less keystrokes, if you will, for entering the information, which makes it more likely someone will actually use their stats. So I'll show you some of those screens. It's a very easy to use vacation mode. Customers can turn on and off the reminder alerts. There's an operating status screen. It's really weak. It doesn't say much, but it's for a homeowner. There's a separate service operating screen that you'll want to look at from the service menu that gives you more data like CFM and all that good stuff. Display settings are obvious. You want your background to be brighter or less, and backlighting and all that stuff. Sometimes there's energy tracking mode, sometimes not. It just really depends. It's only available on some very, very specific pieces of equipment. So basically you have to have a green speed condensing unit with a 59MN7 or otherwise it doesn't work. There's a couple other units that it works on too, but that's for the most part it's those ones. All the other ones it's not available on yet because the equipment doesn't have the ability to track the energy yet. So it's really only available on the most newest stuff. Date and time, that's pretty straightforward. I mean, you're basically setting a clock. That's easy to do. The service button's kind of the interesting one. If you press service, it'll tell you who your service contractor is. If you hold the service button for 10 seconds, it'll turn green. Once it turns green, you can let go of it, and then now you'll be into the advanced setting mode. That's for service technicians only. I suggest you don't do that in front of the homeowner, otherwise they'll just go in there and change stuff they probably shouldn't, like airflows. But you kind of get the idea there. Photo upload, that's where the customer can upload a photo on a thumb drive. Heat source will normally be grayed out. It is only for dual fuel systems. So if you have a dual fuel system, then it'll be live and you can pick your system, heat pump or furnace or whatever. But normally it's grayed out. Same with zone names, normally grayed out unless you have a zoning system. And then if you have a zoning system, you can change the names of your zones here. The wireless is for the Wi-Fi setup. We'll talk about that in a minute. And the weather is the weather app. And the only thing to configure on there is put your zip code in and you're done. So this is what the comfort profile looks like. So this is half of the scheduling, if you will. You basically have 4 types of scenarios: home, away, wake, and sleep. And not only is this applying to the schedules that you do, but also on the main screen where it says touch and go. If I come home early, I can press, it's 2:50 p.m. on Tuesday up here. If I come home early, I can press the home button, and it already knows what I like when I'm home. Or if I go to bed early, I can press sleep and those kind of things. Right? So it helps out with more than just the scheduling. But basically I tell it, what do I like when I'm at home? What do I want to happen when I'm not there, when I'm away? Do I want something special to happen when I first wake up? And do I want to have separate settings when I'm sleeping? For each one of those, I pick the heating and cooling temperature and the fan mode. Now, as I mentioned earlier on version 11 and later software, you no longer will see off. You'll see auto instead of off. So I can pick low, medium, high, or auto would be my choices for the fan. Low, medium, and high means I run my fan continuously at one of those speeds. Unless there's a heating and cooling call, then obviously I ramp up to the correct speed. If I pick auto, that means my fan goes off when there's no mode demand, and then when there's a heating and cooling call, it will do what it needs to do. Right? So on my screen it says off. The new version of it will say auto instead of off, which is a little more intuitive, I think. For the away mode and the away mode only, not only do I get to pick my fan, my heating and cooling set points, I also get to pick this smart setback. This is that feature that I mentioned earlier where it may not go all the way to, in my case, 61 degree setback because this might decide that it's more efficient to maintain 66 degrees, so it's faster to come out of setback later and use less energy as a whole. If I don't like that feature, this is where I turn it off. I switch from on to off if I don't like it. I would recommend you leave it on because it will save energy in the background and people won't notice it, and you might as well save the energy. But if for some reason somebody's squirrely about it, you can turn it off. That would be turned off in the away mode. The other modes don't have it because we don't mess around with your set point in the other modes because you're there. Additionally, other than temperatures, the IAQ stuff, which is the humidity and the ERV, those have settings for home and away. There's no separate wake and sleep setting because they kind of figure, well, if you're home kind of thing. You may like different temperatures when you're sleeping, maybe like a little bit cooler or whatever, but you probably don't want different humidities. So if you look at the home button on the left-hand side over here, below that it says wake, sleep, and manual settings are the same as the home setting. And for the away, it says vacation mode is also the same as the away, right? Which makes sense. So you're considering two scenarios for your humidifier, dehumidification, and ERV. If you don't have an ERV, then on the right-hand screen over there, heating fresh air and cooling fresh air will be grayed out. If you don't have a humidifier, heating humidity will be grayed out. The cooling humidity is always live because on all of our variable speed blower equipment, as you probably know, there's a dehum terminal on there. And if you hit that dehum terminal, what we'll do is we'll tell the condensing unit to go into single stage capacity, low capacity, and we'll tell the furnace blower to run at the slowest speed possible. Less airflow over a certain size evaporator coil is going to get me a better sensible heat ratio. That means I'll do more latent heat removal versus sensible. I'll dehumidify better with minimal overcooling, right? I forget the exact rules, but you won't be able to inadvertently so you're going to accidentally subcool when you dehumidify, right? Even though I'm getting a better sensible heat ratio, I'm still cooling the temperature a little bit. So I'm going to subcool a little bit. It won't let me do that below 70 degrees. It won't let me do it below the heating set point, right? So if I got my setting at 74 for cooling and 72 for heating, it won't let me go below 72 with the dehum mode. And it won't let me go any more than 3 degrees below the cooling set point. So there's some rules there to make sure I don't overcool too much. That's always available to me. And the humidity is available to me if I have a humidifier. The scheduling side is really easy. You can either go through and configure the times the way you want, or you can choose Guide Me Through Scheduling, which is basically interview-based programming. You get asked a few questions. For example, what time do you wake up? What time do you leave for work? Is anyone home while you're gone? What time do you get back? What time do you go to bed? Right? You answer those 4 or 5 basic questions, it'll build your schedule based on that. And earlier, you already told it what you liked when you were home, away, wake, and sleep. So if you answer those questions, it already knows what you want, and it'll build all those schedules for you. And then if you want to build the weekdays separate from the weekends, you can do that. Or if you have a special thing you do on Thursdays and you want a special schedule for that, you can build that one separately. So you can pick, schedule it through a table like the way you always did it, or do the interview where it asks you plain, simple English questions and configure it that way. This is what the final schedule will look like, and you can edit anything that you want. You can click on it and then change it to a different time or different whatever you want, different mode, etc. Vacation scheduling is easy. You tell it when you're leaving, when you're coming back, what do you want to happen while you're gone. So this dude's leaving on May 28th. He's coming back on June 9th. He wants to maintain 81 degree set point while he's gone. Done. Of course, he knows he's coming back at exactly 12:57 p.m. He's super detailed, schedule master guy. But it'll start tweaking the temperature sometime before 1 o'clock. So when he walks in the door at 1 o'clock, it's already back to his normal schedule, whatever that was, right? You can do this from your remote app as well, obviously. So if you're at the airport and you realize, honey, we didn't turn back the stat, no problem. Log in from your app, change it, done. The customer has the reminder screen here. They can turn any of the reminders off that they want to. If they're annoyed by the filter alarm reminder popping up, they can come in here and turn it off. Now, what they can't do is they can't change what the filter alarm is based on. They can't change it from monthly to real true static pressure or vice versa. They can't pick how many months it is. Same with the humidifier pad. They can't configure the alarm, but if they get annoyed by it, they can shut it off. Of course, then it's their fault when the humidifier doesn't operate anymore because the pads turn into a nice piece of cottage cheese, but whatever. That's their operating status screen. Like I said, it's very basic. You on the server side will want to use the server screens instead. Display settings, they can configure if they want to change stuff and tweak it. It's all preferences, so it doesn't really affect you on the server side. The Wi-Fi. This does affect you on the service side. Most of the service techs I talk to want to say that this is not part of their scope of work, but I'll tell you, if you don't set up the Wi-Fi for the customer, it's going to get jacked up. They're probably going to do it wrong. They're probably not going to select you as the dealer. You're not going to be able to log in on the back end as the dealer and help them later on. So you really want to set this up with them or for them, one or the other, and it's not as hard as you might think. Right, so on the menu screen, I'll press the wireless button, and then I'll get the second screen over here. I'll try to use my little red dot to follow along. Brian wrote in a question, but he didn't finish it. I can something he was going to write. Go ahead and finish writing it, Brian, and I will try to answer your question. So here's my little spotlight thing. All right, I'll click on wireless. Then I'll click on set up a Wi-Fi connection. Then I'll click scan for available access points. All the Wi-Fi networks in the area will pop up. I will pick the one that goes with my router. In the case of one of the Carrier or Bryant supplied routers, the name of the router will start with my HVAC something. So my HVAC 2956BA or whatever it is, I'll pick that one. If I'm not using a Carrier supplied router, then I'll pick whatever the customer's one is. Right? So once I pick the router I want, it'll pull up the screen where I can put in the password. To put the password in, I just click on the white box. A little keyboard will pop up. A little keyboard will pop up like this. I can punch in the password. I will typically get it off the bottom of the router. If it's on the bottom of the router, if it's a customer's router, then who knows? And then it'll go ahead and connect to the system. It sounds like a lot of steps. It's really not. It's the same thing you guys all do on your iPad or your cell phone or whatever. So it's all basic stuff. Set up a connection, scan for available networks, pick the name of the one you want, punch the password in, right? And then it goes and connects. Once it connects, you'll see on the screen, instead of saying connect, it'll say disconnect there now. I can't connect to two Wi-Fi networks, so my choices are do nothing or disconnect. If I go to the second word on there, on the list, it says view remote access status. If I go ahead and I click on that guy, I'll see my network status as connected, which means I'm talking to the Wi-Fi. And then typically I'll see in red not connected for my Evolution server or my Infinity server. So the first thing it's doing is connecting to your router to establish the good Wi-Fi connection. Then what it's doing is sending a message from the thermostat to the router, to your internet provider, to the Bryant or Carrier server somewhere. And then that guy is sending a message all the way back through to your thermostat backwards saying, yeah, I see you. You're live. I get it. You're connected. So the first one will say, yes, I'm connected to your Wi-Fi. The next one will say, no, not connected yet. And then after a little bit, it'll connect. The factory says it's about 3 minutes to do that, and usually it is. In the early days, it was taking 10, 15, 20 minutes sometimes or longer to connect. So what I tell the guys, the techs, is I tell you guys, do this first. Set up the Wi-Fi connection first. Then we'll go in and start messing with the service screens and gas pressures and refrigerant charging and all that. That way this thing can do its thing in the background, and if it takes 20 minutes, no big deal because I got other work to do. Unfortunately, what happens is all the service techs wait till the very last thing on the job. They're 100% complete with everything. Now they go set up the Wi-Fi because, well, basically you guys don't like setting up the Wi-Fi, so you save it for last. And now you're sitting at this screen staring at it for 20 minutes, and you're probably cursing my name. So set it up first. Do the Wi-Fi first. Once I'm connected and both of these say connected, I'm connected to the Wi-Fi and I'm connected to Bryant in this case. Now I can go to the third thing on here, which is my Evolution registration info. When I click on that, I get this set of numbers here, serial number, MAC address, and PIN number. These are the numbers that I have to punch in onto the website portal that I'll show you later on in order to connect this thermostat and bind it with the customer's account. This PIN number and everything's just a one-time thing. Mrs. Jones sets up her password the way she wants. It's her dog's name, Fluffy, all that good stuff. But I got to bind it to her account the very first time so we know this stat belongs to her account and connect them together. Very much like connecting Bluetooth on your phone to your car, right? You got to punch the password in the first time, otherwise it doesn't know they go together. If for some reason Mrs. Jones leaves, right, and somebody else moves in, that's when I might have to change this PIN number on here so I can reconnect this stat to someone else's account. Because the chances of Mrs. Jones logging into her account and disconnecting her stat is pretty low. She just bought a new house. She's not worried about the old house, right? So I might have to come put a new PIN number in here and connect it to Mr. Smith's account now. That's the way I would do it. But this PIN number is a one-time thing. It doesn't matter what the number is because it has nothing to do with the way the homeowner logs in later on. One-time shot. Get my mouse back here. If there's any questions on that, please type them in. For the weather app, you just punch the zip code in. Obviously, we got to be connected to the web in order for this to work, and we have to have good two-way communication with that server. So this might take a few more minutes. And in fact, it may take like 10 minutes to even get the weather update. They don't broadcast the weather every second because the weather doesn't change that fast. Although in Chicago, you might argue different. But say for sake of argument, they broadcast it every 10 minutes. I may have to wait a few more minutes to get the next broadcast update from me. So it's not a big deal. Just put the zip code in. Check it before you leave the job site. It's probably updating by then. And hopefully it's not snowing when it's 82 degrees. But once again, in Chicago, you never know what's going to happen. You're able to see all the last alarm codes on here and the timestamps at which they occurred. That's very useful to you. You have this on the old stat as well. You have it on the new one. There's also ways to go in and see even more alarm codes than this. But 10 is the quick, easy one you can pull up. You can also interrogate the furnace circuit board and get more alarm history. Or you can get it on the website, which I'll show you in a little while. With certain pieces of equipment, you must do the charging of the condensing unit or heat pump with the thermostat, right? So this would apply to the variable speed heat pumps, which is the Carrier Green Speed and the Bryant Extreme, and it also applies to the new 5-stage ACs and the 5-stage heat pumps. So anybody with an inverter must do its refrigerant charging in conjunction with the thermostat. We already know the model number of your condensing unit, and the thermostat knows how much refrigerant the coils in your condensing unit can hold. If it sees one of those models of condensing units during startup, it would have also asked you to select your evaporator model number from a drop-down list. It wants to know that because it knows how much refrigerant the evaporator can hold. Then at this point in time right here, it'll ask you, well, how long is your line set? In my case, 15 feet. And what diameter is it? 5/8 in this case. If I know the condenser coil, and I know the evaporator coil, and I know the line set, I know everything. And I can tell you how many pounds of refrigerant you should have. In this particular case, which was I think this was a 5-ton Green Speed unit, it told me that I needed to weigh in 15 pounds, 12 ounces. When I go look at the tag on the unit, I'll see that it's shipped with 15 pounds, so that means I have to weigh 12 ounces in. If I was working with a smaller unit, like I think the other one in my lab is a 3-ton Bryant 5-stage unit, which is a much smaller coil, it told me I needed 6 pounds, 2 ounces. When I read the tag, it said I had 5.5, right? So obviously I got to weigh 8 ounces in. That's step one to charging these units. You got to punch the line set length in, and it'll tell you how much refrigerant to weigh in with a scale. If you don't carry a scale, you need to start. This is extremely common. We do it on all the variable refrigerant flow systems. Now we're doing it on some of the res stuff too. You need a scale. Additionally, there's a subcooling mode that I can go to on any of those 6 outdoor units, 3 from Carrier, 3 from Bryant, and it'll tell me my target subcooling. It'll take some time to initialize. In this case, it's saying 15 minutes, 14 minutes, and 58 seconds. Depending on the conditions, it could be longer. 25 minutes is not uncommon. It'll run the unit to get a nice, stable operating point, right? And then it'll let you do your checks. So it'll tell you what your target subcooling needs to be. You can verify that. There's a second screen. If I hit the down arrow, I can see what my suction pressure is. This one also shows discharge pressure, but that's no longer something you can see. I think now you're going to see suction pressure and suction temperature are the two values you'd be able to read on this unit. So theoretically, you should be able to charge this without bringing your gauges out to some degree. Now, I know in the real world, everybody's going to put their gauges on it. I get it. It's totally fine. And even in the classes with Len, he'll show you how to do that. If you've not already been to one of the variable speed classes, You definitely want to check that out. We did a bunch of them back in September again because of the new units that came out, and Len's got them going in January, February, and March, I think it is. Check it out on our schedule. Some of those classes are already filling up. So if you need help with the 5-stage and variable speed units, not just charging, but the whole unit itself, installation, service, everything, check out Len Mason's classes on our website. They're already open for registration. Additionally, at some of those units outside, I mentioned that you'll see that there are only 2 wires. All the inverter ones are 2 wires for the ABCD communication cable, as are most of the newer 2-stage Infinity and Evolution units. The terminal will look like this. It'll say A, B, C, and then no use on it instead of D, right? You only have to wire up A and B, which is the communication. If you want, you can take a second user interface or take the one off the homeowner's wall if you want to and go outside and connect it. If you do that, you need to get power for the interface temporarily. Here's where you can get power from: the utility terminal, the UT, and the common. You can't get it from C and D because there is no power on those terminals, right? Because it's a 2-wire install. If there's any alarms at any point in time, you'll get a pop-up box in orange. It could be there's new software to download. It could be that it's time to change your filter. It could be there's an igniter fault. Hopefully there's not a pilot light failure because, as you guys know, Bryant and Evolution furnaces never had pilot lights. So this one's just a joke that somebody played on me when they made me the slides. But I like it now, so I keep it on here. And I'm going to invent a pilot light furnace soon again. All right. I'm going to show you the website stuff. Before I do that, we want to go through some of the service settings screens. So I'm actually going to flip out of this PowerPoint here, and I'm going to go to the install book, right? I'm skipping all the stuff at the beginning, and I just wanted to go through this because there's some nice screens on here that show you what you're going to see, and we could talk about what some of these screens mean on the service side, right? So in order to get into the service settings, you have to press and hold the service button for 10 seconds, like I mentioned. So you go to Menu, scroll down to Service, hold the service button for 10 seconds. It'll turn green. Once it's green, you can let go, and you'll see this screen on the right-hand corner. So hopefully you guys can all see this. I'll try to zoom it up a little bigger here, right? You'll see the screen on the left-hand corner. I'll have equipment summary, install, setup, checkout, and then I have a down arrow. I can actually scroll down and see even more stuff as I go, right? So the other stuff that I can see is showing you here. I got service information, software upgrades, dealer logo uploads, utility events, stuff like that. We're going to go through some of these, right? So the first one, equipment summary. This is basically just telling me what I have. Right, in this case, I got an FE fan coil with 3-stage electric heat and a 289 BNA, which is a Bryant heat pump, right? So I can make sure, oh yeah, that's what I do in fact have, right? So I will be able to see my model numbers and my equipment. If I have zones on there, it'll tell me which zones I have, 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6, and I'll say, wait a minute, wait, where's zone number 4? Why didn't it register? And I'll have to go figure out what happened to zone number 4. What kind of filter do I have? Do you have a humidifier, yes or no? ERV, UV lights, etc. If they're grayed out, you don't have them. If they're white, you do have them, kind of thing. Right? As I go through some of the next screens, one of the things I can do, the next screen on the install screen, which is below the equipment summary, I can do a full installation or I can do an airflow verification test. Full installation will do the exact same thing it did at startup. It'll go through and scan and look for the equipment and do the static pressure test and ask me what kind of humidifier I have and filter and all that stuff. So normally I don't come in and do that again. Now if I installed some new equipment, let's say I change out your condensing unit to a new one, a different model or whatever, an upgrade, blah, blah, blah. Now I'd want to come in and do the full install again, right? I have to do that. But normally I wouldn't touch that. The airflow verification test, that does just the static pressure test portion of that full install. So I don't want to change my equipment configuration, none of that stuff. I just want to do the static test again, right? So maybe I switched to a different type of filter. Maybe you upgraded to an Infinity air purifier from a media filter, so I want to get a new baseline to test it at. Or maybe I just changed out your filter, so I want to do a new baseline or something like that. Maybe we added a new branch run to one of your zones that was not getting enough airflow, so maybe I want to do the airflow part again, that kind of thing. Below that install, there's the setup button, right? So I go back up here just a little bit. I got equipment summary, install, then setup. Setup has by far the most stuff in it, so we're going to spend quite a bit of time on that. If I go to the setup screen, I will see different things that I can configure. The thermostat, the fan coil or furnace, depending on which I have, the AC or heat pump, right, and a few things down the line. Sometimes the thing you want does not seem to be in an intuitive category. So I'll kind of explain that as I go, but if I want to configure the cooling airflow, in my mind, I would go to the AC heat pump. But in reality, I go to the furnace or the fan coil because he's the one that has the blower, so I configure the cooling airflow over there. So I'm configuring each piece of equipment individually based on where the thing is happening, not based on what mode I'm in, right? So I'll kind of try to explain that as I go along here. So the first one, if I click on thermostat, here's what I would see. The first choice I'd have would be auto mode, right? So if I click on auto mode setup, I have the ability to turn that off if I don't want it. Well, I'll just kind of read through them. So if you don't want to have the customer pick heat, cool, or auto, and you want auto to go away, and they just pick heat or cool mode, you can do that. Sometimes older folks like this. They want to open their windows in the mid-season. They don't want an auto mode. Fine. Click on auto mode, get rid of it. Heat, cool, deadband, that's pretty straightforward. That's the minimum differential that has to be maintained between heating and cooling set points. By default, it's 2 degrees, meaning if I have a 74-degree cooling set point, my heating set point will not be allowed to be raised above 72. If I try to raise heating up to 73, it'll bump the cooling up to 75 to always maintain a 2-degree deadband for me. I can pick anywhere from 0 to 6 degrees of deadband. The bigger the deadband, the more the energy savings. The smaller the deadband, the better the comfort level. In general, 2 degrees is a normal, good level, and I would leave that alone in most cases. If I click on offsets, this one's kind of nice. Basically, I could, I don't want to say the word calibrate, but I could, let's just say calibrate. I can calibrate my space temperature sensor reading, my remote sensor, if I have one, my outdoor temperature reading, and my indoor humidity reading to match whatever the customer wants it to match. I don't want to say calibrate because these are thermistors and they're pretty accurate and they don't really drift or anything like that. They're pretty much good or bad. And you can test them with your ohm meter, like I said. But even though they're pretty accurate and maybe it says it's 72 and it really is 72, the customer may think it's 74 in there. Right? They got some old mercury bulbs sitting on the kitchen counter and, gosh darn it, it's 74 in here and your thing says 72. Your thing's wrong. Fine. Instead of arguing with them why yours is more accurate than their old mercury bulb, just make it match the mercury bulb. You can add plus or minus, 2 degrees or whatever to make it work. The maximum is 5 degrees. You can add 5 degrees or take 5 degrees off to make it match. If it's more than 5 degrees, I guess you have to tell the customer that they're crazy. The outdoor temperature is the same way. You can add 5 degrees or take 5 degrees off of the actual reading, and it'll adjust everything accordingly to match the customer's gauge they have hanging off their window or whatever. The one thing I will caution you with about using that on the outdoor temperature is you cannot use it to overcompensate for the sensor being in the direct sunlight. Because if you do, when it becomes dark out, it'll be wrong the other direction, right? I added 5 degrees on it to try to make it better, and now when it comes nighttime, oops, I'm 5 degrees off the other way. So you got to get the sensor out of the sunlight. You cannot calibrate it with this offset configuration. And there's one for the humidifier, humidity reading as well. It's plus or minus 10%. You can tweak that guy. There's a reset factory default screen on here. Basically, I can reset any one of 4 different things to the default. So I can the user programs, the installer programs, these sorts of things. So if somebody messed something up and totally jacked it up, and then you're the guy coming out there to service it, and you're going through it screen by screen, and you can't figure out what the heck they were doing, and you realize the person that was there before you is an idiot, and you want to just start over, you can reset everything back to factory default and basically wipe all their settings out of the stat and just start over from scratch. In that screen, you also have the ability to choose if you want to reset the error codes on the stat. I would highly recommend you do not do that. I know that every tech wants to do that. There's some sort of sense of satisfaction that after you go there and fix their problem, you clear all the error codes out. But when you do that, you're erasing the history of what happened on this job. Don't erase the history. Leave it there for yourself and your coworker and whoever else comes there a year from now so they can see what has happened with this unit over time. The customer's only going to see the most active alarms anyway, and if something's not an alarm, they're not going to see it. So you're not really clearing it off from the customer. You're clearing it out of the service history. So keep it there so you can have it history recorded in there as long as you need to. The only time I would say you'd want to clear that out is if you change a piece of equipment. Oh, you upgraded their furnace, but you kept their stat, right? And they got a new Infinity furnace? Great. Well, I don't want the old history in there from the old furnace. I wipe that out. But for normal stuff, leave the history there. If I scroll down below factory reset defaults, I'll have one for scheduling on-off. That basically means I want to make this a non-programmable stat. Like I said, you're required by state law to put a programmable stat in. You have to do it. You don't have a choice. But if the customer wants to turn the scheduling off and they just want to, they're retirees and they're always home or whatever, fine. Turn the scheduling off. They don't have to use it, but you have to install a programmable stat. With that being said, we still sell a lot of non-programmable stats, so please stop buying those. It's against the law. It's legal for us to sell them. It's illegal for you to put them in. So that's kind of our excuse I hear over here. But smart recovery on-off. If you want to turn that off, you certainly can. That's the feature where if you tell this thing to go occupied at 5 p.m., it starts tweaking itself anywhere between 3:30 and 5 o'clock in order to get to set point by the time you want it there, right? So it can do it earlier if it needs to. This is where you would turn that off if you don't want it. In general, you want it, but some people might not like it, so you have the option available to you. All right, so that's all the stuff in the thermostat setup. And in the book, as you can see, everything I just mentioned is described here in the book. Normally, I take classes out in the lab, and I do this live in the lab we have, but it's kind of hard to do that over the webinar, so that's why I'm using the book here as kind of my guideline. So we're going to kind of scroll ahead here. The next thing would be the furnace or the fan coil setup. So there's different things I can configure there. There's airflow settings. This one's a fan coil example that we're showing here. See if I can get to the, well, we'll just do the fan coil example. The furnace one would be very similar. But I have airflow setups for heating and cooling modes. The cooling mode's fairly interesting. I basically have 5 that I can choose from. I have quiet, I have comfort, I have efficiency 325, efficiency 350, and then I have max. So it's a little bit different for each system, but for kind of a check figure in your head, quiet is the lowest one. It can be as low as 275 CFM per ton. Comfort is usually hovering around 300 CFM per ton, and comfort is the default, by the way. You can go to efficiency 325, which is 325 CFM a ton, efficiency 350, which is 350 CFM per ton, or you can go to max, which is the traditional 400 CFM per ton. So everybody knows the 400. We've been saying that for years, 400 CFM per ton, 400 CFM per ton. What you probably didn't realize is, 5 or 8 years ago, we started shipping everything at 300 CFM a ton. We get much better dehumidification with the lower airflow, and most products don't require the higher airflow. With that being said, you could have a job that's jacked up and the ductwork sucks and you can't get any air to the last register. Fine. On that job, you're going to have to go to one of the higher airflows, 325, 350, or 400. On that same screen, you'll also get a choice on the dehumidification. You can pick normal or you can pick high. What I said earlier when we go to dehumidification mode is we want to put cooling on in the lowest stage possible and have the lowest airflow speed we can to get the most latent energy transfer out of that evaporator coil. However, the factory lets you pick if you want it to be high airflow instead of normal low airflow for dehumidification mode. In general, you don't want to do this. I mean, the whole idea is to have the slower airflow to get better dehumidification. The concern is with ducts in attics and stuff like that, sweating, and maybe if you have a higher airflow, you can avoid some of that sweating. I would argue that if you have ductwork in the attic that's sweating, you should go and insulate it. That's your solution. But if you want the Band-Aid, it's to increase the airflow in the dehum mode. That's why you have that available to you. So I got my airflows for heating and cooling. There's an altitude choice as well. You can ignore that in our market. These things are all set up in Indianapolis, which is 800 feet above sea level. In Chicago, we're 600 feet above sea level. Functionally speaking, that's the same thing, so you don't have to change it. If you're doing a gas furnace install in Denver, okay, fine, you have to change it. But here in Chicago, it's basically the same as Indy, so you can leave that alone. But just note that it's there. There's a G terminal input that I have the flexibility to do some stuff with, which is really cool. Let me see if I can scroll down to that one section for you. All right, so this is what that screen looks like. It has changed more recently, so you definitely want to get on version 11 software if you want to use this. So because we're not using the thermostat inputs and we're using A, B, C, D instead, I have the ability to use this G terminal for other stuff. So they give me this flexible input basically. If I want to use it, I toggle this setting to yes, right? And then I get to pick. Do I want it to be a fan enable? Do I want it to be just an alert that just notifies me of something? Or do I want it to be a shutdown? If I pick fan enable and I wire something to this G terminal switch, right, and I get that contact from something, then my fan will be forced to run in whatever mode I specify on the right-hand side of this screen, low, medium, or high. If anything hits the G terminal, I go to low, medium, or high, right? Automatically shove it into that mode. If I were to pick shutdown, that's kind of the opposite. If I pick shutdown, then whenever something wires to this terminal input, I shut the blower down. I just shut everything down. A very common one is a duct-mounted smoke detector, right? You might put that in your duct. That way, if there's smoke in the house, instead of circulating smoke around the building, right, I shut the furnace fan down, so I stop feeding new oxygen to the fire, and I stop moving smoke from room to room, right? It's very common to do. Commercial buildings, if you have more than 2,000 CFM, you're required to put a smoke detector in, both per the International Mechanical Code and the Fire Protection Code. But for residential systems, it's not required, but it's certainly a great option to sell someone, right? Duct-mounted smoke detector, they cost, whatever, less than $200. Mount it for them, and it's an extra safety feature for them. This is where you would wire that up at. The third choice is the alert mode. If I pick alert, no action happens. The fan doesn't do anything. The system doesn't do anything different. It keeps operating, but it will still send me the email or text message alert letting me know I had an alert condition, and I can custom name that alert to be whatever I want. A very commonly requested one is to have a water intrusion sensor on your basement floor. There's different types, right? But one of the ones that we like is it's like a long strip of tape, if you will. You tape down to the floor, and there's 2 wires in the tape. And if water starts flooding in the basement, it covers up both of those 2 wires, right, and makes an electrical connection. And I can hit this alert contact and tell you that you have flooded basement or water leak in basement or something like that. You can also tie it into some kind of alert signal off your boiler or your generator or whatever you want it to. Anything that can be boiled down to a switch contact can be fed back through here and give you an alert on your cell phone. And by you, I mean the homeowner. Well, and the dealer. You can do both. I'll show you that in a little bit too. So that's something you have flexibility over, right? I could pick if these are normally open or normally closed contacts. It can accommodate both types of sensors for both the alert and the shutdown mode. And I can custom label the alert one if I want to. All right, so you can call it whatever you want. If I have a furnace instead of a fan coil, I have some of the same settings like the altitude and the cooling airflows, with the quiet, comfort, efficiency, all that's still there. But I also have some stuff for the furnace side of the equation as well. The furnace airflow is by far the most confusing thing. And if you press that little information button when you're on this screen, it'll actually describe to you what it says right here. It's a really good information button. But basically, you have the choice of comfort or efficiency and low heat rise on or off. These are basically the same old dip switches you had in the furnace all along, but now they're on the screen over here instead. Right? The default is the comfort mode, which is the least amount of airflow. If I need more airflow because my ductwork sucks or whatever the case may be and I can't get air at the last register, instead of comfort, I would pick efficiency and I would get more airflow to the system. Then additionally, I have this low heat rise one, which is intended for bypass humidifiers, right? My bypass is going to steal some of my air and not let it go out to the duct system. So I need to turn this feature on so I can increase the amount of airflow going through the furnace to get more air out my registers. So I can turn that feature on. By default, he's off. If I got a bypass humidifier, I turn it on. Or if I have really bad ductwork and I can't get air out my last diffuser and I already switched to efficiency and I still can't get enough airflow, I can go turn the low heat rise on even though I don't have a bypass humidifier and get even more airflow. So the least amount is comfort and off. The most airflow is efficiency and on. I don't know why they couldn't just tell you more airflow and less airflow, but they had to come up with these little words like comfort and efficiency. So it's a little bit confusing, but if you got the book, you can figure it out. If you don't have the book, hit the I information button, and it'll tell you the same thing the book's telling you right here. As far as the AC and heat pump airflow, it's the same choices I just mentioned. Quiet, comfort, 325, 350, and max 400. Same way on a furnace like it was on the fan coil. Dehumidification mode works the same exact way, right? Normal or high. Generally, you pick normal. The furnace staging is kind of a weird one. I'm not sure exactly why this is even in here, but you have some choices on here. Depending on how many stages your furnace has, instead of just letting it do its own automatic thing, which makes the most sense, you can pick and force it into run only in low or only in high or something like that. I don't know why you'd want to do this, but if you say you only pick high, the furnace only runs in high fire. Why you just sold someone a multi-stage furnace and only let it run in high fire, I don't know. We kind of use it as a Band-Aid in a couple cases, right? You got these old people living at a house. They're used to this hot air blasting in their face. They think that means comfort. To me, hot air in my face and then cold air, then hot air, then cold air, that doesn't sound comfortable. I'd rather have continuously nice air. But that's what they're used to for 50 years, and that's what they want. Fine. If you really want to, you can go in after the fact and basically make this a one-stage furnace and lock it into a specific speed if you need to do that. If you have a modulating gas furnace, it's a little bit more complex. You're able to chop off the bottom half or the top half of the ramping. Right? I can go from 40 to 100% in 1% increments. But I can make it only go from 50 to 90 if I want to, 60 to 70 if I want to. Right? I can chop off the bottom half and the upper half of these curves. It's a little weird the way you do it. You do it by adjusting the minimum CFM on the modulating gas furnace or the maximum CFM. And that's what's going to lock in your maximum and minimum heating airflows and hence your minimum gas valve position and your maximum gas valve position. I don't know why they just didn't give it to you in terms of percent. They gave it to you in terms of airflow. In general, you would leave this alone and you would not touch it. But if for some reason you didn't want the furnace to ramp down as low, well, maybe once again you got the older folks that like to have the warmer discharge air, even though it's generally speaking less comfortable for most of us. You have continuously nice air. You can chop off the bottom half of the curve, right, or that sort of thing. Or if the furnace you put in is a little bit too big and you want to chop off the top half, you can do that. Don't tell the sales guys in your office. They'll try to put 120,000 BTU furnaces on every job, and we can't chop 120 down to an 80. It's not going to work. But 120, chop it down to 110, yeah, we can do that. Ignore the altitude. Like I said, the default is for Indianapolis. We're good there. No problem with that. Furnace dehumidifier drain. This one's actually interesting. The default used to be 5 minutes on the old stats. On these new ones, it's 15 minutes. Basically, after a cooling call, we want to shut the blower off so we don't continue to blow moisture off the evaporator coil and let it evaporate back into your air. So we shut the blower off, let the moisture all drain down the evap into the condensate pan, and then drain it away. In most cases, 5 minutes is long enough to do this. The new default's 15 minutes. I don't know why it's 15 minutes. Maybe they have to do it, to design it around Miami and Houston where it's nasty humidity and it takes longer. If you leave it on 15 minutes here in our climate, you basically disabled continuous fan because by 15 minutes, you're already going to have another cooling call, right? So if you talk to Len Mason or I when we're doing the classes and stuff, we generally recommend putting it at 5 minutes or if you want 10 minutes. But 15 minutes is a little bit long, we think. G terminal, same setting as the fan coil. We got some flexibility on how we configure that. Same exact stuff as the fan coil there. Under the AC and heat pump setting, I have a few things I can configure, and it does depend on which heat pumps I have. For example, if I have one with inverters, then I'll have the ability to do the refrigerant charging and stuff like that on here. If I have one with heat pumps, then defrost interval will be live. If I have one with low ambient cooling, variable speed condenser fan, then low ambient cooling will be live. But depending on what unit I have, some things are grayed out, some things are not. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'll just mention a few of them. Cooling lockout is one that comes up sometimes. Right, if I pick the cooling lockout, what I have the ability to do, where's cooling lockout? No. The cooling lockout, it doesn't really tell you here, but there you go. You can pick 45, 50, or 55 degrees. If it's below whatever number you pick, no compression, no matter what. You don't get it, right? So normally I go ahead and I pick 45 for these, figuring you don't need cooling below that. And if you do, you should open your window in most cases. And if you do need cooling below that, you should get a low ambient situation set up. So you can lock out the cooling based on the ambient temperature. If you have a heat pump, you can pick the defrost interval. The default is auto. The heat pump will use its own internal controls, which includes the outdoor air temperature sensor and the saturated condensing temperature sensor, to decide if it needs to go into a defrost mode or not. I don't know why you would take that away. Let it make the decision. But if for some reason you need to have it happen every so many minutes, you can go back in and do it old school and say every 60 minutes or whatever you want, go ahead and do the defrost cycle, right? But I would let this heat pump make the decision instead, and then it goes into defrost less often, which means there's less likelihood I blow cold air on people. If you do have a low ambient cooling unit, this is where you would turn it on, right? I can enable that. Just a few different choices like that. See if we can kind of keep moving along here to save time. If you have a variable speed inverter unit, I can specifically like the green speed and the extreme units, I can limit the maximum RPM of the compressor. Sometimes I might do this if I want to reduce the capacity because it's a little bit oversized maybe, but more likely because of noise issues. It's a very quiet unit, but when it goes to full speed, it does have a little bit of a higher sound. So you may want to do that. In most cases, you're not touching that. I'm going to skip some of these other ones because they're really, really nichey. If you got a dual fuel system, you can pick when you lock out the heat pump and when you lock out the furnace, right? So you can kind of make those choices. If you want the furnace to run while the heat pump's in the defrost mode, you can turn that on, yes, over here. Normally, we do not let the furnace run with the refrigeration being pressurized, but for a brief couple minutes for defrost mode, it is allowed. So I'm going to keep on moving along here. I'm not going to go through all the zoning settings. There's not very much you can do there. There's some limits for the airflows and stuff like that. It's basically just a tweaking thing you're doing there. Nothing super sexy. You can go back and change any of the configuration stuff you changed earlier. Filter timers, filter types, humidifier timers, UV timers. All right, so I already mentioned those, so I'm going to skip those. You can do utility curtailment, which means if the utility sends me a signal to my input on my condensing unit, I can choose whether I'm going to disable my condensing unit or go to low capacity only, or ignore the utility. I could pick that, I suppose. That's one of my other choices. There's also some really cool checkout screens that are available. It's especially useful on the furnace and condensing units that have multiple capacities to them. So I can pick what I want to run, heating or cooling mode, right? Gas furnace or electric heat if it's a fan coil. I can pick the mode I want to run. And then when it comes up on the screen, it'll ask me, how many minutes do you want to run that mode for? And I'll tell it 5 minutes or whatever, or 10 minutes. So for a furnace, for example, it'll say how many minutes at low fire and how many minutes at high fire do you want to run? Maybe I'll pick 5 for each, and I'll hook up my manometer onto the gas pressure. And then when I go to low fire, I can make sure I got the right gas pressure, and I can dial that in on my modulating gas valve. And then I'll go to high fire. I can dial that in. And if I dial in the low and the high, I know everything in between is going to be good. Or I can also do the cooling mode checkout. I can tell how many minutes I want to run in cooling mode, so I can go outside and do my checkout stuff there. It's just nicer than going to the stat and jacking up the set points and jacking down the set points, because who knows what's going to happen when you do that. You might satisfy, or the homeowner may touch something. It's better to go in the checkout mode and you dictate exactly what capacity you want the indoor or outdoor unit to run at, so you can do a nice, proper checkout. So that's what all those screens would be. I don't know if there's anything else we need to talk about on here. We're good on most of those screens. I'm trying to jam 4 hours with the class into a 2-hour webinar, but the last thing I want to make sure that I do with you guys is I want to go over to the website side real quick and just take 5 minutes and show you that over there. So there's different ways to get to the website. The easiest way that I remember to do it is I go to bryant.com/myhome, right? And it'll automatically bring me here. So if I go to bryant.com/myhome, like I have up on the screen there, it'll bring me to this screen. The carrier side, as you might imagine, is carrier.com/myhome. There are other ways to get to where we want to go, but I'm recommending you use these 2 ways, bryant.com/myhome and carrier.com/myhome, because you can use it for any of the Wi-Fi stats that they have. So the current Evolution Connex, the old Evolution, which believe it or not had a Wi-Fi module as well as an Ethernet module. We never used them, but they existed, so that's why it's on here. The brand new Bryant Wi-Fi thermostat that came out back in September, and then very shortly, in the next couple weeks, it'll have the new Bryant Housewise Preferred Series thermostat. Same with the carrier side. It has those 3, Infinity Touch, the old Infinity, the new carrier Wi-Fi, and then very soon it'll have the carrier core thermostat on here, which is kind of like your, it's like an edge type stat, but Wi-Fi accessible. All right, so if you do it that way, you can kind of get to everything from one link and not have to memorize all the individual links. Once you pick the one you want, you'll get a screen like this, and I'm going to go ahead and show the carrier one. Since I did the Bryant slides, I'll do the carrier website. There's a couple different things on here. For starters, up along the top, whether I'm logged in or not, I have access to some stuff up here. One is a try it out button. I can click on that guy if I want to. And then depending on what kind of device I have, if it has flash demo available, I can actually run a live demo. I say live, it looks like it's live, but it's just controlling a dummy stat, right? So I'm not messing anybody's house up. Of what the stat looks like and how it works, and people can see how it's going to be navigated. Unfortunately for me right now, broadcasting the webinar and recording the video online of the webinar is really cramping my style here. So I'm not going to do that because it'll take forever. But it'll bring up a fake stat that you can play with and show someone. If you go to the Learn More button, if I click over on that guy, then what will happen is I'll have some videos I can play. There's a couple marketing videos here, which is fine. Then as I go down lower, I have a whole menu over here of different videos that I can watch as a homeowner. It tells me how to do different things. Each one of them is 30 seconds to 2 minutes long. right? And it tells me what they are. Oh, how do I do my vacation setting? Oh, how do I set my time clock? How do I do a photo upload? They can click on that, watch a video of somebody doing it, and then they can just copy and do the same thing the guy on the video just did. I would suggest you show this to your customers. It may help you with some easy calls. It's easier than you trying to explain it over the phone. They can see someone do it versus you describing it. So it might help them out a little bit. Under the Downloads tab, from here, you can download different software tools. You can get the app for the Apple stuff, the app for the Android stuff. They're also available in the App Store and the Google Play Store. And there's also an app you can come over here and download where my mouse is at for your computer, your laptop, or your desktop. You need to have this app as a contractor in order to load your contact info onto a thumb drive and your dealer logo info onto a thumb drive. For a customer, you would use this app to load a photo onto your thumb drive for a screensaver. You can also control your stat from this app if you want to. You probably wouldn't, but you could do that if you wanted to. And down at the bottom, you can also download the latest software for the stat. It's still there. And now you'd be letting it do it automatically, right, over on the on-the-air updates. But if you wanted to go to an older one, you can download the software from here and put it on a thumb drive. All right, I'm going to go to the login button and just show you what it looks like when you log in. All right, so if I didn't have an account, instead of picking login, I pick sign me up, and I would create an account. What do you want your login name to be? What's your name? What's your address, etc.? What do you want your password to be? I already have one, so I'm going to skip that, and I'm going to go to login. Maybe, right? If I went the other route and I put a brand new stat on here, the first thing it would have asked me is, well, what's your serial number, what's your MAC address, and what's that PIN? Remember I showed you that on the thermostat before, off the Wi-Fi screen? I need to have these three pieces of information in order to add a thermostat to my account. Right? I'm not going to do that right now because I already have a thermostat on here. You can have multiple locations under one account, and you can have multiple thermostats under each location. In my case, I have two locations, right? Melrose Demo and Melrose Zoning, and each one of them has one stat under it. I can see what's going on with my system there. In my case, I got 4 zones on here, so you see 4 different things. I can edit stuff on that system. I could change the name of it, right? Which change my name on here and on my app automatically. I can also change how my alarming is going to work. There's 3 different things that can get alarms. 2 of them are for the homeowner, 1 is for the dealer. The homeowner picks their main email and their secondary email. It could be wife and husband, husband and wife. In my case, it's me and my text message email address. If you didn't know, every cell phone has an email address that goes to your text inbox. It's your phone number at something. For Sprint, it's this long thing, messaging.sprintpcs.com. For Verizon, it's .vtext.com, and so on. That gives me an email that goes in my text inbox if I want to do it that way. For each one of these guys, I can pick which alarms I get. Do I want routine alarms, which means I want my dirty filter alarm, my humidifier pad, UV light change, that kind of stuff, right? Do I want my urgent alarms, which means my alarm codes off the furnace or condensing unit, alarm code 34 igniter fault or whatever it is. I can also check this third box and I can get an email every time someone changes a system setting. I highly recommend you do not do that. It is extremely annoying. Every time someone touches the stat, you get an email. I turned it on once on my stat in the lab, and then every time Len did a furnace class, I got like 1,000 emails. It drove me crazy. So now I leave that off. This one is useful, the fourth one. If I can't talk to your stat for 2 hours, I meaning the Carrier and Bryant servers, for 2 hours, I assume something bad happened to your stat, and I send you a note, an email, saying, hey, your stat's got a problem. I don't know if you lost power at your house. I don't know if you lost internet at your house. I don't know if your 5-year-old took a hammer to the stat. I don't know what happened, but it's not talking to me. You got to go check it out, right? Then the secondary contact, I got the same choices, right? So the husband and wife can get different stuff if they want to. And the fourth one is my dealer contact. You'll notice that I cannot pick the dealer's email address. The email address is automatically part of the dealer's profile in HVAC Partners. So whatever they have set up as their service email, that's where these will go. The customer can pick who their dealer is, but they don't get to pick what their email address is and all that. And the dealer can pick which, or the customer and the dealer together can pick which of these things they want to do. Do you want routine alarms? Do you want urgent alarms? Do you want none of them? Just depends on what you have set up with your customer and what you promised them. I do recommend you check these other boxes, right? I want my dealer to be able to see my status online, yes. I want my dealer to be able to view my schedules, yes. right? Do I want my dealer to be able to modify my settings, right? I don't see any reason why they wouldn't let you view it. That should be a no-brainer. They hired you to put this system in. They should let you view the settings. Whether they want you to be able to modify stuff or not, well, that's their choice. You got to decide that yes or no. All right, so you can pick those different settings for the dealer. There's two ways to set up the dealer on there. You can either do it on the thumb drive, like I mentioned. When you upload your logo, you can automatically upload your contact info. Or I can come on here and pick select the dealer. This won't change the logo on the stat, but it'll change everything else. It'll change my dealer info as far as email alarms go, and it'll change who displays on my thermostat. So if I just punch my zip code in for Melrose Park here, and I say search 10-mile radius, I'll get all my carrier dealers within 10 miles. Right, and I'll pick whoever it's going to be. I'll pick a guy. I pick Mr. AirTech. He's my dealer. When I click save down here at the bottom, then he'll be the one that gets all the email alarms for my stat. He'll be the only one that can log into it. If an alert comes up on my screen, it'll be his contact info right here. It'll still have whatever old logo it has. There's no logo that goes through this way, but all the contact info does. If I want to set up and this is pretty much it for the homeowner. The last thing I'll show you for the homeowner real quick, and then I'll show you the last dealer setting and we'll be done. For the homeowner, if they want, they can see all their alarm codes here for their system. They can clear them out. I leave them on here because I like having them on here. And as you can see, I can go all the way back. Well, the date's taking time to populate, but it goes back to 2010. There you go. Well, that one goes back to 2013. The other one goes back to 2010, I believe. My other stat, right? So I can see any alarm codes that I've had on this stat at any point in time. You can delete them if you don't want them. I suggest you keep them. Why not have the history of what happened with this thing? If I want to change the settings on one of my stats, I can click Change Settings, and it'll basically open up a screen that looks like my stat. Whether I open it from here, or whether I open it from my app, or whether I go to my stat itself, it always looks and feels and navigates exactly the same way. There'll be some things on here I can't change. Like I can't change my Wi-Fi access from here right now because I can't change the Wi-Fi while I'm on the Wi-Fi. That wouldn't make any sense, right? I have to go to the stat to do that. And you can't do any of the service stuff remotely. The service settings can only be accessed when you're at the stat. They don't want people changing airflows and things like that when they're not physically there, right? Because that would not be very safe, right? But no matter where I'm at, it looks the same way. Whether I'm on the website, on the app, or at the stat, everything looks, navigates, smells, and feels the same way, no matter what I'm doing, right? So that makes it easy for people. They don't have to learn two different ways to navigate things, right? So they can change stuff from there. All right, the last thing I want to show you is if you install the app on your desktop, the desktop software tool. Let me open that real quick amongst my thousands of programs here. Now I'm going to show you one thing on there. It's how to set up a thumb drive with your dealer info. So I open my Infinity app in this case, or if it was Brian, I'd open up my Evolution app. Remember, the place you would download this would have been under Downloads on the website. It'd be nice if this would open slightly faster. Oh, it's asking me to do an Adobe update, which I will not do. I'll save that for another day. All right. Drag this over here. I'll put this on the screen so you guys can see it. So if I open up the software on my computer that I downloaded from the website, it looks like this. I can either log into my actual stat if I'm a homeowner and control my stat, or I can just go to demo mode and either run a demo on my laptop for a customer to see what it's going to look like, or in my case, I'm going to go to the demo mode, and I'm actually going to use it to load a photo of a dealer logo. Right, everything works the same on here, just like it works on everything else. If I go to menu and I hold service for 10 seconds, it'll bring up the tool where I can configure my dealer info and put it on a thumb drive. The first one is my dealer expert, and this is me, the dealer, doing this. I'll put my zip code in again, right? I hit search. It'll pull up all the people, all the carrier dealers in this radius. If I go to the Bryant software, it'll pull up the Bryant dealers in that same radius. Obviously, you want the one that's specific to your brand. I'll pick my dealer. It tells me what the contact info is to make sure it's right. Some dealers have more stuff listed than others depending on how you set yourself up in HVAC Partners. So you can find someone that has more info. See, like this guy's got his website on there in addition to his phone number. So set your stuff up in HVAC Partners to have all the info so it pushes through onto everything here. I'll say next. It'll tell me to save it on my thumb drive in a folder called Dealer. So I'll hit export. Leave the file name the way it is, whatever weird thing it is, logo 1. Go to your thumb drive. Now I don't have a thumb drive set up, so I'm going to do it on my desktop. But you would go to your thumb drive right here under my computer, pick drive E or whatever one says thumb drive or flash drive, and then you would save it. A folder called dealer. So make a folder called dealer and save it on there. Then I'd go do my dealer logo export. It tells me the acceptable file formats. Right, I got to have my logo in one of those formats. I go grab my logo from wherever I keep my logo on my computer. I'll go grab a logo of something. I'll just grab this Bryant logo for right now. We'll put a Bryant logo on the carrier stat. That won't seem weird at all, right? I can pick how I want it to look. In most cases, you're going to have to leave it letterbox or it's going to get jacked up. So leave it on letterbox. Hit next. It tells you save it on the same thumb drive in the same folder called dealer that you made, right? So I'll export that. I go find my thumb drive. Boom, boom, boom. I'll find my folder called dealer. In this case, I'm just going to dump it on my desktop because I don't have a thumb drive on my computer right now. But I would create a folder called dealer and put it in there and say save. On your thumb drive, you can have whatever you want on there. You can have other unrelated things for PowerPoint presentations or whatever you want. It's fine. But there's 3 folders that matter on there. One is the one called dealer. That's where the thermostat's going to look in that folder for your dealer contact info and your dealer logo image, right? If you have a folder called user, that's where the stat's going to look to find a photo screensaver for the customer. And if you have a folder called T-stat, that's where it's going to look for software to do the update with. Now it doesn't really matter because you do updates online over the web, but in the quote-unquote old days, that's how we did it. Right, then you would take this thumb drive and you can go plug it into the stat and do what you need to do. You go to the service menu and you would scroll down and pick dealer logo update. And when you do that, it'll take the logo information and it'll take the contact info. All right, let me see if we have any last questions, and we're going to shut it down here. So this is the longest webinar I ever did, and not a single person typed in a question. So I'll stay on for another minute or two. If you got a question, type it in, and I'll do my best to answer it. If you don't have a question, or if you have one later, send me an email or something like that. I will throw my contact info up on the screen one last time, so you have that info. Maybe I will. There we go. Maybe I won't. There. All right, doesn't look like I have any questions, so I'm going to start shutting things down. Like I said, this webinar was recorded, right? So you can watch it at any time in the future. And I thank you guys for logging in.